Meeting to order. If you could please rise. Pastor Doug Pratt with the First Presbyterian Church will lead us in prayer this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Thank you for the privilege of praying for you. Dear Lord, we thank you for the blessings that we enjoy. Thank you for this great free land in which we live. Thank you for this most beautiful community where we have the privilege of living. We pray your blessing now upon this evening, upon our council members and staff, upon their work together, and upon all who speak. Lord, we pray that those who lead us might be people who can listen well and feel the needs of our community. They might speak clearly. They might be wise in their deliberations and actions, and they might do all with graciousness and respect to one another. Lord, we want our community to continue to grow and flourish, and we pray that. I ask all of this in the name of the God whom I love and serve. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Councilwoman Carumba, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Carumba. Here. Councilman DeWitt.
Here.
Councilwoman Carr.
Here.
Mayor Simmons.
Here.
Councilman O'Flynn.
Here.
Councilman Gibson. Councilman Forbes.
Here. And I did speak, I got a message from Councilman Gibson. He'll be a few minutes late, but he will be here. Good evening, everybody. We're going to start with public comment tonight. Public comment on agenda items. If you could please come forward at this time. Good evening.
Age before beauty, huh? Good evening. For the record, Kathy McGrath. Just a quick comment. I just picked up the packet and I see item B, the WCIND. As you all know, I'm on the Waterways Advisory Committee, and we prioritize the grant applications, and the city always has the correct one in, and I know we'll approve it. Okay?
Great. Thank you.
Good program.
Other members of the public that would like to speak, please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council, my fellow Bonitians. Jesse Purdon for the record. I wanted to talk to you on something. This is on the consent agenda, but I just wanted to come see you all. Fiesta Bonita. What we're talking about is 6H, and it has to do with Fiesta Bonita, and I just kind of wanted to go over it with you just because last year we kind of went over some things. There was a couple issues here and there. Bottom line, I wanted to tell you how the process went. So 2 years ago, we got this started. As you know, it was a city was involved, but they weren't financially invested. Last year, we got an investment from the city, and we actually grew the event to 3,000 people. So this event is really, it's one of the major initiatives that comes out of the Outreach Committee, number one. Number two, I'm very excited and enthused about the fact that this is going to be something that not only did this council start, but this is going to be something that hopefully will be going on after all of us are no longer involved in this stuff anymore. So it's a very good step moving forward for Bonita, and I really appreciate the financial component. And I want you to know, from a city staff component, I really wanted to take a second in front of our city manager to let you know that Laura Taylor, listen, I promise you this, I'm no walk in the park. And I promise you further that my committee is made of, I don't think if you tried in Bonita, you could get a more alpha group of hard-headed individuals, and she somehow keeps us in line, on track, and keeps moving the ball forward down the field. So Laura Taylor definitely deserves some kudos for that. With that being said, 2 years ago, as I said, it was what it was. Last year, it got to 3,000. Next year, I think we're going to beat that. And for the sake of transparency, we decided early on in this year that we were going to do an RFP. Because, as you know, we didn't do that the first time around. Second time around, we had a little bit of static because of that. Third time around, we decided, I'm going to get it right, and I wanted to come back to you to tell you we did do it right. We have an RFP. It's going out, hopefully. You guys are going to see it, and if you don't have any issues, timetable-wise, we're in a good position to move forward on it. And this way, everybody has a fair opportunity. It's clean, transparent, out in the open, and I'm really excited for the possibility of what next year is going to bring. So thank you all very much, and that's all I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. Other members of the public that would like to speak? Councilwoman Simons, good evening.
Mayor Peter, great to see you again. Council members, I'm here for the Lions agreement out at the park. Hey, great to see you, Mike. So I hope you'll approve that. Also, I see on here that the grant application to the Minnesota Twins for the kids' ball field renovation. Excellent idea. I don't know who came up with that, but good for you. But I do want to say that because of the hurricane and all that, you know, projects have been delayed that we wanted to get to out there, but we have been out there doing Lions type things, sorting glosses and getting ready for this Saturday, next Saturday's vision screening in Immokalee. So we give people free eyeglasses, and we've been collecting them and sorting them and cleaning them and repairing them, and that's what we do. So I hope you'll approve that for us. It's not costing anything, and it's nice. Thanks. Great to see y'all.
Great. Thank you,
Appreciate
Martha.
it. And form-based code. It's great depending on how you write it. So be very careful. I would like to ask you to include, once again, fraternal organizations and lodges there. There's a reason for that, and I won't get into it, but that was left out of, you know, the prior comprehensive plan downtown. I think it could be helpful if the Historical Society, the McSwain House, and hopefully you get the bamboo property right too. But try to think organically about what makes a hometown buzz downtown. I wasn't really so happy with how the comprehensive plan was written down there because, you know, you need shoe stores, you need people, well, people don't go to stationary stores anymore, but like an Apple store, or, you know, what are those things that people are attracted to, that people want, that they're constantly going out and going for, and that's what you need to make it downtown work. God bless you. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, folks.
Thank you very much. Other members of the public that would like to speak? Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Council, what's your pleasure?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve and a second. Is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilman Carumba? Aye. Councilman DeWitt?
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr?
Aye.
Mayor Simmons?
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn?
Aye.
Councilman Gibson?
Aye.
Councilman Forbes?
Aye.
Okay.
Mayor, I just have a comment on one item.
Yes.
Which is the Minnesota Twins. I just want to thank the Minnesota Club in Bonita Bay and Chris Corey, who's the head of the Bonita Bay Community Association, reached out to the Minnesota Club, and there were like 10 people who knew people at the Twins who were in management positions. So great stuff, and something similar is going on with respect to the Red Sox. So just a big thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great work. Amy?
I have a couple comments.
Sure.
I first want to point out G. I'm delighted that we passed this. This is like the third object of two others that we bought last year, and I think it's going to make a great addition to River Park, and the Art and Public Places is doing a good job in developing what hopefully at some point will be a sculpture park down there. But that's a great addition down there, and I hope you get, they're all kinetic, so you should go down and look at them. And
Great.
and I do want to thank the staff and whoever participated in both the I and J items here, because we as a city really need these grants to get some of the things done that we want to get done. So anyone that participated, I want to appreciate that, and we're doing a great job. So thank you for the effort that the staff and anybody else did there.
Great. Greg?
I just want to say thanks to the outreach committee. They're doing a fine job. We established it under our leadership, under your leadership, and under here. It's a fairly new committee that we have, and they're taking the ball and really running with it. So I just want to thank them and Jesse Purden, who's the chair of it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Council, anything else? Okay, we're going to move on to proclamations and presentations. We now have a presentation by DPZ Co-Design on Form-Based Codes, and this is Green Sheet 1902-040.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening, we want to give you an update of where we are in the process. Back in November, the City Council decided to move forward with the beginning of Phase 1 of implementing a form-based code for downtown Bonita Springs. I want to reiterate to the Council and for the public that this does not change any of the regulatory or is not a proposal to amend the comprehensive plan in any way. This is to conform with the existing comprehensive plan and to see where form-based code may be applicable in our 041 corridor. To begin, the Council approved Phase 1, which has steps 1 through 4, and we are in the middle of that process right now, where they're receiving more additional feedback. Last evening, we had a workshop with the public, and then today there was open office hours for any particular property owner or potential project that wanted to come forward who could have one-on-one time with DPZ, and they're going to give you some insight on how those meetings went and some ideas of some potential future development that might be coming. Once the completion of task 1 is complete, there are 3 additional tasks before the form-based code would be in place. There's a mapping component. There's more public input in this process as well. And I'll let Galina go into further detail on the next steps of that as well. But with that, we'll move forward. This is an interactive workshop into getting more feedback from the public and an update to the council on the feedback received so far.
Wonderful. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Happy to be here again. I presented to you the introduction to the form-based code for downtown last October, I believe. So we were happy to come here again yesterday. Wonderful weather. The city is really lively. Now it's the population is, I guess, larger. And we have been experiencing, more lively traffic and all of that. But nevertheless, it looks a wonderful environment, especially in the downtown, where the existing streetscape, the large public investment which you have already accomplished, is still waiting for the kind of the spur of private investment. We were happy to see that some projects are already out of the ground. It looks like there is momentum going on, so we'll be happy to contribute to this momentum with this form-based code. The form-based code is focused on primarily the downtown area. Last time, and in this document which we prepared for you before, we have outlined the boundaries of the downtown code. However, these boundaries are still flexible. Today we heard from property owners that they would like to be maybe included, or that in some areas there were proposals for change of the mapping and all of that. We started the discussion saying that we are far away from the literal mapping and the literal writing of the code. This first task is to still introduce the ideas and the concepts to the community. That last time we were here in October, we also have a workshop, an interactive workshop, but the people who were here last night actually were different. So we again we had to start a little bit from the beginning. So this was the presentation which I gave last night, but I shortened it for this presentation. We were here a long time, and I was asked to really be more generous towards you and basically shorten the presentation. So we will start directly with the proposed table of contents, or the potential components which will be in the code. It is relatively similar to what you have now in your land use code. Of course, there are components which will be very different. But as I said before, and we have outlined in this preliminary introduction, there are already form-based elements in your current regulations. You talk about parking, you talk about the position of the building, height and form of building, form and massing of buildings in your current regulations. So it's not an entire novelty for the community. We will obviously have an intent, and I will go very fast through this, but then I go in more detail later. There will be the intent, the existing conditions, the boundaries of the districts, applicability, procedure for review, and appeals and variances. These are 2 items which may go further down the line. It's the arrangement and the order may be slightly different. There will be, of course, the core and the kind of the meat of the code are the urban design standards and guidelines. We talked last night about the difference between standards and guidelines, and I will touch upon that as well. Landscape design standards and guidelines, thoroughfare standards and guidelines, special district overlays, and plan developments and assemblages. These items were discussed prior to our workshop yesterday. They were discussed before in, I believe, a couple of phone calls and conference calls with staff and discussing, the arrangements and the details, but I can cover some of them for you here. The intent of the form-based code, I think that this is an important wordsmithing exercise, which we do not believe that we have achieved a kind of a good language. Still, we would like your input. These were the first intentions which we discussed during our preliminary meetings, the preliminary workshops, when we were preparing the introduction to the code. But the large themes which we came out of these meetings were that you really care about the scale. You want to keep the feeling of a kind of a small town character of your downtown, the aesthetics, how buildings fit together, how they fit the streetscape, how the buildings will be presented, even some stylistic elements which will be difficult to regulate, but we heard several times a kind of clear preference to the local Florida syntax and not so much the Mediterranean, which will make you a little bit different from Naples and other places. Predictability, people want to know what will happen next to them or across from the street from them. They want their investment and their property values to be either preserved or even increased. And of course, the new investment by the public sector. Then I'll go all the way down to the last one, which is promote development attractive to the next generation that allows them not only to live in downtown, to be attracted to come to be part of the downtown, but also to be part of the economics of this growth, that they can maybe part of the development and the investment in the area. And then all of these other issues, achieving the context-based development, ensure more predictability, which is a little bit repetitive, enable coherent and walkable streetscape, and all of these. These are things which will these are basically code language, even if it's only in the intent. So this will be written in much more detail later. Here we are elaborating a little bit. I had for the last night's workshop a few of the prior illustrations and some additional ones where we wanted to reiterate the fact that it will be up to you guys and the community to what extent you want to calibrate the specificity of the code, whether you want to be more strict on form and volume and parking location, building elements, or to go a little bit more loose. We compared it with the thermostat, that you can basically move it up and down. And if you want to be very specific about how the buildings will look and where to put, the taller buildings or smaller buildings along along your block structure, you can go with the last drawing to the. Can I just do that? This one here to the right, where a kind of a higher degree of regulation is achieved. Then this is the synoptic survey results, which give us some direct metrics. And what I mean by that is that the form-based code relies on numbers in terms of setbacks, heights of the buildings, position of the parking, how the public frontage actually relates to the public, that the private frontage relates to the public frontage. And these are several examples here from Bonita Springs, which some of them are good and we can replicate some of the ideas, and some are not that good. We take them as something which needs to be improved. Like, for example, in the single family areas, that we do not want to have the garage door or the parking spot to be the predominant frontage on the facade. So it's like basically percentage of the building facade needs to be occupied by habitable space, by human elements, elements, building elements which talk about human habitation and not the car or auto habitation, and things like that. So these are the metrics which we'll be deriving. The boundaries of the districts, which there were some notes from the last year's workshop, which we corrected. Even last night we were asked, oh, but this color or that color in certain areas. And we said, this is still a very rough draft. We're not even in this task in our form-based code process where we are literally mapping. I presented to you then the idea of the transect methodology, where a range of different building types are basically bundled within several transect zones, and these building types will be interchangeable within each zone. Like, for example, in this case of the downtown, we have a limited number of transect zones from kind of the predominantly residential, this lighter color, which we call T3, or suburban, which is predominantly residential. And we have two types, which are open and restricted. And then we have a T4, which we call a kind of an urban general zone, in which not only single-family housing is allowed, but also building types such as townhouses, live-work units, small apartment buildings. Right now, currently in your land use code, you are already allowing some of these to happen, and some lots are being redeveloped with these types. So we already have the precedent. And then the most intensive development, of course, will be along your main corridor, Old 41, which will be the most intensive mixed use. It will be probably a range of building heights. We heard the desire for variety of the streetscape, not to repeat kind of the more solid building wall of, for example, of Naples or other places where they have a kind of a stable, I believe, 3 stories, and with a setback, and that's the kind of along the whole street, that you still want to have the smaller scale incremental growth, even if you go to, in some places, to 4 stories. So this is the major commercial corridor, and we also are proposing 2 categories, which is the urban core edge and the urban core central, I think, or how did we call it? I'm forgetting. Core and edge. Sorry, the core and edge. And why was this? Because we thought that along the whole length of Old 41, it will not be possible to require retail and shop fronts throughout the whole length of the road. So we thought that maybe in the upper area we can say that, and this is a kind of outlined with a red line, is the place where we focus the most of the commercial, retail stores, the shop fronts, restaurants are focused there. And then the rest, of course, it's recommended, but it's not mandatory. So there is no pressure that these places will stay as empty shop fronts down the line if they cannot, there is no market for them. It's a lengthy, I don't know exactly the length, but it is a kind of a more than actually 5-minute walking distance. It's probably at least a quarter of a mile or more. And we thought that these two categories will alleviate the pressure for retail on the ground floor. So there is more work to be done. This is, with all of this said, is that there will be more work on the mapping exercise. This is to show kind of a zoom in where we are showing a proposal for expansion in the north, in the southwest side of the downtown. It is good to have the same zoning category on both sides of a street, and not to have a kind of the border of the downtown regulatory map in the middle of the street, unless you have a special preference for asymmetrical development on both sides. So it's good to have it on both sides of the street with the same. And this is happening also on the east side. These were the identified the zones, the transect zones, which are identified within the Bonita Springs downtown. As I said, the T3, the T4, and T5. Some of them are building types, and like, for example, in the T3 zone, these are building types which you have here widespread. Others, like townhouses and small apartment buildings, which are very compatible with single-family housing. You don't have that many of them, so these are from other places, mostly projects which we have built around the country. And then the T5, which is along 41. Then we have also a civic zone, which incorporates the kind of in the core area you have the square in front of the county library, and then some other larger pieces. Even the name today, we were reminded that maybe this is not the most appropriate name for this district, calling it civic, because it's not going to be only a civic. There are, for example, the city owns the bamboo property, and we mapped the bamboo property as the most intensive T5 zoning. So it's a kind of a matter of labeling and nomenclature, which we will be improving in the future. And then we have a special district, which is basically the industrial area in the northwest corner of Bonita Beach Road and Old 41. This is the item on applicability of the form-based code. Right now, it applies to the existing Bonita Springs downtown master plan. And then we add some additional areas, as I showed in the prior zoom-ins. This is the important thing, and it has to be made clear that it actually replaces all the prior regulatory documents for the downtown. It will not be an overlay. It will be basically the code for that area. It is expandable to other nodes of Bonita Springs. We believe that it will be probably appropriate for a couple of the other nodes, maybe on in the more intensive intersection of Bonita Beach Road, but that's something which will be down the line. If you feel that this code is a successful tool for you to encourage a kind of private investment, then you can expand it, but it will be up to you and up to the vote. And then standards and guidelines I mentioned before. Standards are activated by a word like shall, and they're mandatory. And then we have guidelines which are activated by should, and they're not mandatory, they're recommended. As I said, for example, retail along Old 41, it shall be where the red line was, the retail shall be mandatory in certain areas where we want really the activity and the storefronts and all of that. And in other places where they are recommended, we use the word should. Then these are kind of the more technical pages. These are general descriptions of the T-zones, but this is something which will go into the code directly. In this particular code, we see that there will be an intersection of a general description of a T-zone, and then there will be an illustrative series of building types. So it is a kind of it will be a hybrid between the highly technical description of T-zone, which you see here, T3, T4, T5, what exactly is included in these zones, but then there will be some other drawings which I'm going to show you. Basically, the code will have drawings and language which will make this document a regulatory legislative, basically the law. This is the summary table, and these are really very small. And in your case, these are just the zones. This is a summary table which includes all zones. From nature and rural and really low density to T3, T4, T5, and all the way to much higher density T5. But in this case, we'll have only this section between T3 and 5, and all these metrics will be calibrated for your local context, which we have derived from the analytic synoptic survey which we did last year. And of course, it will be an interactive kind of testing of some of these numbers. This afternoon, we were reminded that we can do actually within the downtown, we can have some test grounds, and we have done this as a separate assignment. We have done this with the bamboo property. We can do it with some others, or further continue exploring on the bamboo property how the form-based code will be tested, and these numbers, whether we can how we are going to work with them. This particular table talks about building function. I was asked last night, I think, that it was about, are you going to basically take away the uses, because we're talking about form-based code, and we say the form-based code is not that interested in the use. You can have a more flexible use within the building. What we are interested in the form of the buildings, but no, we're not taking away the use as a kind of a part of the form-based code. There will be uses which are appropriate in certain places and not appropriate in others. Like for example, a retail. A storefront or a restaurant will not be allowed in T3, where it's a predominantly residential area. But like, for example, we discussed last night, the lodging, which is bed and breakfast or motel or hotel, and how you can calibrate them. Bed and breakfast can happen in T3, even in a residential area. A small or a larger bed and breakfast can happen in T4. A hotel or something larger, motel or whatever else lodging use can happen in the T5. So all of these, basically the purpose of this code will be not to take out certain uses or even building types, but to allocate them accordingly, to allocate them in their appropriate places. Building function and parking, intensity and parking. Of course, this is very important, and some of these diagrams are already in your current land use code. How you deal with parking requirements. This is something which we need to talk further. This is just a very initial proposal. Of course, frontages. We talk about a private frontage, which can be anything from an arcade or a gallery or a porch or a stoop, and here they are arranged, again, according to their urban quality, according to their location within the bigger context of the downtown. Then we have the civic space, and civic space is, again, or open space, which is probably more correctly, it can be allocated in the different T-zones, from a small playground to a larger plaza to a square, all the way to a large park. And their design and their landscape detailing will be different in the different zones. Definitions illustrated. There may be such a section of the code where, for example, a transect zone will be described, or other, what we mean by storefront and other things like that. Building height studies. These studies we did actually last year when we did the introduction to the form-based code, and we will need your direct feedback on those. These are basically illustrating how all 41 will look, 1-story, 2-story, 3-story, and all kinds of combination of these heights. I believe that probably the most correct thing will be to allow, buildings to go higher than 1 story, obviously, and then to cap it at 4 stories. And the fourth floor, the fourth story can be allowed in some modifications, and I will show you further what we mean by that. These are these additional drawings which I mentioned, which will be illustrating a kind of the drier tables with the numbers. These are building height, orientation, and massing. These are basically parametric numbers of minimums and maximums, which will show the lot widths, the front setback, the side setbacks, all of these things, and they're not going to be just one number. They will be parametric. Like, for example, the front setback, in this particular case, this is T5. This will be along the kind of the commercial corridor. You know, the front setback can vary from, let's say, 0, where it's either existing or where you have enough of a sidewalk, to, let's say, 10 or 15 feet, where if you want to create outside seating, or you have, a plaza or something like that, or it's probably the sidewalk is not wide enough and you want to create more public space. And if, of course, the depth of the property allows that. So we will create these metrics based on the particulars of the T-zone with the flexibility, if we have, it's, let's say, between 0 and, let's say, 10 feet, the predominant dimension may be around 6 or 7 feet or something like that. But it's never only one number. There is internal flexibility with these numbers. Then this is another one. We heard about the desire to return some of the, and restore some of the alley access, especially in the commercial area where, service will be nice to be actually accommodated in the back of buildings. We will see how much of this will go into the mapping exercise. We'll see whether the properties actually can yield such a restoration of the alley system, which was once. Then some of the building elements. Here we still talk about urban design standards, but some of those can fall under guidelines. And some of these, again, they can be mandatory and recommended. This is the full range of signage for a downtown form-based code. This is crucial. The signage can be really well, and should be really well coordinated, so there is a kind of a special brand or a special, a more harmonious assemblage of signage. Here, of course, you see that these two buildings and a smaller building here shows the full range. And here we went all the way to, 9 types of signage. And of course, they're not going to be allowed all of these in one building. We will have limited number of signage which you can achieve, which you can implement in your building. Like, for example, you can do maybe a temporary sidewalk sign when you open the business, or you want to invite for, I don't know, for brunch or for outdoor, some kind of outdoor sales or something like that. And then you have diagonal corner signs or a fabric awning sign, et cetera, et cetera. So these will be really very carefully tailored. Then this was a drawing which is actually is not necessarily the architecture or the syntax here, but it actually illustrates how a fourth floor, if we want to go to the 4th floor with the building heights, it can be accommodated with a smaller footprint. It's something like a tower or a piece of a building, also coordinated with the use of the terraces. This, if you want to create a kind of a memorable and a singular character for Bonita Springs, maybe your 4th floor incorporates these usable green terraces or spaces. I mean, I don't know how practical or how applicable this can be, but this is just one idea to show that the 4th floor and a more diverse a kind of silhouette along the streetscape can be achieved with different means, which are, through architecture and design. Then here, these are drawings which we did in the introduction, where we were showing in the lower residential areas, in a kind of predominantly residential areas, the restoration of alleys with individual lots. When you implement this alley, then you can have garages off of it, and the frontage of the lots can be liberated for the building themselves and not for the cars. And the streetscape basically can evolve gradually into much more pedestrian friendly streetscapes. And then this is the assembly of larger lots. This is probably 1 acre of a parcel where we are suggesting, because of the introduction of the alley in the back, you can create a cluster of a smaller duplexes and smaller houses around a common green. And that's just one approach to planned development and assemblages. Then the special district, which will be basically the industrial, current industrial area. We had the idea about temporary, or the word may not be the best, a kind of activation, which can be a step-by-step or gradual or tactical activation. Instead of starting, we would love to see all these big buildings, let's say there, and they are wonderful, whether accommodating WeWork space or artists' lofts or things like that, which is really will be very attractive to the younger generation, and it will be a cool place to be. To start with something smaller, maybe with food trucks, with a public space, maybe even incorporating shipping containers. And I talked about it last night. We talked about some examples in Miami, like Wynwood, and they have this really lively parking lot, which became like the focal point of all of Wynwood, called Wynwood Yard, where it became like the incubation of businesses. Now these businesses are moving somewhere else, and now a big, development, Lennar is coming and building mixed-use building. But instead of waiting and having this area empty for a long time, you begin to incubate local activity in these places. And we're very happy to hear that there is already interest to do this in the industrial area, something similar, of similar character. And then again, here it's about the item on planned development and assemblages, which I talked a little bit about in the residential areas, but this is along the commercial corridor, or our main spine. And it can start with a one-story condition, which right now is something similar. You have basically little stores. It doesn't preclude the existence for a few years, or for this transitional period, of businesses which are currently there. I was asked, last night this question. They will be grandfathered in till they become, non-conforming, and then gradually will be redeveloped. And how this can be, in this particular case, we just showed like second story. This is not a drawing specifically done for I'm forgetting the Old 41, for Old 41, but just to show that such growth is very possible by keeping the smaller scale increment of development like that. What actually will be necessary is to look at the parking situation, where it will be much more helpful if the parking location and access is consolidated in some way. It will be difficult to accommodate every property, parking and access if the lots remain small. So some kind of cooperation between the ownership will be required, and we can look at regulatory mechanisms to allow for that. And then these are some more general recommendations that you will need the comfortable sidewalks along 41. You have achieved already the streetscape, the on-street parking, which you already have, and then details like from awnings to where you put the parking, and how you do cross-block pedestrian connectivity between blocks. So to have as much pedestrian permeability to your retail area as much as possible. And this is how it can look. As you can see, it's still small scale, 2-story buildings or 3 stories. These are the 2 examples which we developed. I think that we have about 5 different options for the bamboo site, and this is one showing incorporating a smaller building type. It is basically smaller units, whether they're apartments or condominiums, is to be seen. In case that you don't prefer to develop or to have on the site like a big parking garage. We wanted to keep a kind of the smaller scale, and this is just one of many options. As you can see from the plan, these are discrete buildings with 2 or 3 stories. They can accommodate quite a kind of an interesting density. It will be within the required density, but with an interesting walk along the river, connectivity, a kind of a promenade where you park, but it's also a public space. Then we went to something more intensive, where we kept to the lot to the north with the surface parking, and then a parking garage to the southern portion. But nevertheless, we wanted to demonstrate that even with a building like this, which is almost like a mega structure, because that's a large parking garage, to basically to maximize the site, the buildings which are surrounding the garage and which are masking it from 41 and also from the rest of the neighborhood, the buildings, they are designed as discrete, almost detached buildings, in line with some of the vision renderings which you have done recently, or a couple of years ago, or whenever you were proposing those. So these are a kind of first tests of the of the form-based code for the downtown, but we wanted to show that on the same property and with the same zoning, you can achieve actually a different look and different feel, and stay within the parameters, within the parameters of the code. These are some of the comments which we received last night. We discussed the parking ratios, and we know that this will be a kind of a technical conversation. We know that there will be big changes coming our way with the autonomous vehicles. As part of our Bonita Beach land use study, we had a multi-volume analysis and literature which we provided for you on autonomous vehicles, and we have seen that there is a tendency for optimism about reduction of parking in the future. But we have to be prepared, for the short term and for the midterm and for the long term future. Last night somebody mentioned that in Naples, for example, there is like a really a kind of too extended or too much of a requirement for restaurants, 10 per 1,000 square feet, which is really, for 1,000 square feet, which is very high. And this can scare away potential tenants because they cannot provide the parking or something like that. So maybe the possibility of concentrating some larger numbers of parking, which can be actually transformed into something else in the future in the bamboo property, can create this maybe balance of parking for the future businesses along 41. In general, I believe that it will be good to propose, and it can be part of the form-based code, a strategy for parking management on the larger scale. As now you have a downtown a merchant association or something like that, in a similar way, and I don't know how effective it is, you need to have basically downtown parking management system in place. So people can use and share parking in different places, that the parking is not required to be on site for each property. That's really important in a place which is of mixed use, of kind of with the intentions to be very highly walkable and pedestrian friendly. Then it was concerns over the regulating plan, the transect zones, and this was about the boundaries. And I mentioned to you that these boundaries is something which we will be looking at. There were some properties also to the north. We received a proposal that we expand the boundary of the downtown to the north to include a kind of the properties which are more at the gateway. You know, right now there were properties basically cut in half by the boundaries of the downtown, which probably should be more inclusive of the entire property. Does the form-based code limit the creativity of the architect? This was one of the questions by a couple of architects who were here. And what we shared last night that, like, for example, in Miami 21, which is the largest form-based code applied to a city, where, believe me, there are many creative architects and all kinds of tall buildings, and Zaha Hadid and like the most famous architects in the world worked recently, like Big and Rem Koolhaas. They didn't have a problem working with the form-based code, because the form-based code is interested at the most about the habitable space along the streetscape and how buildings meet the public realm at the level of the pedestrian. What happens above is not that important, so the creativity is not going to be limited unless you want to limit it. And we can be more restrictive or less restrictive according to your vision. And as long as the community is behind the vision, together with their leadership, with you, then the form-based code becomes the law, and people will be coming and will be able to invest and develop in the downtown, knowing what to expect, and they will not be in fear that something crazy will happen next door, or something odd, or somebody will have more than they have, and things like that. So there will be a kind of the equity among the development and also an agreement what the vision is about the scale, about the aesthetics, and what the downtown will look like, which will actually shorten and alleviate the approvals and entitlement processes only to a kind of administrative steps, and possibly not going to council approvals for every small thing which happens, like somebody wants to change a sign, or like a fence or something, to come to you for all of these things, but they will be done administratively by staff, because there is already an understanding in the community how these things should be or shall be according to the code. Then another one was how could or would the form-based code be expanded to other parts of Bonita Springs? And I mentioned that it will be most likely, we believe that it may happen in some of the nodes, but it will be up to the community. This is further down the line, long term. And then how can the price of housing be controlled under the new code? We talked about attainable workforce housing, and how in cases of redevelopments and new codes, places become unaffordable. And we discussed that in general, we will try to achieve this by the increment of development. We'll try to remain a kind of a place where a smaller player, a smaller investor can still come and build something, or a property owner for that matter. And we met today with at least several. They have a lot or 2 lots, and they want to build their own office or their own building. So if these people can do that easily, this will be very promising. If they can do this without too much delay, in a efficient and cooperative way, and also contribute with their property to the beautification and aesthetics and overall vision, all the better. So it will be a win-win for everybody. And this is how we would like to see attainable housing or affordable. I know that this word is not preferable, but the attainable housing is, for us, all the housing which will be used by the younger generation. Somebody graduating from college and coming back, like, let's say, to Bonita Springs, they would love to be in the activity area, in the downtown. But do they have the opportunity to rent a small apartment? Do they have an opportunity to maybe rent an accessory unit? The accessory units, or we call them outbuilding or granny flat, are very useful in this respect. basically to keep some attainable housing within reach. And the places, I mean, there are many places around the country where they are now allowed and they are not counted towards density because it's usually, it's either a family member, an in-law, or or you know, the younger generation coming back or something like that. So we will look at that possibility. Also, the variety of building types is very important. You know, till recently we were thinking that our only choices are either big apartment buildings, you know, big, tall condominiums, or the single family house. Now we know that there is a whole range of housing which is in the middle, which has been missing in action for many, many years, and it can be recovered and be this more incremental and more actually housing which is preferred and desired not only by the next generation but also by the senior generation. Not everybody wants to be in a large house with a large lot. Many people would like to retire in a more urban environment where they can walk to the stores and to the restaurants and the cafes and have access to other amenities, civic and cultural and other in arts venues and things. We hear that basically Old 41 is already an attractive place for all kinds of artistic initiatives, and that you have during the year you have festivals and music venues and the artists' residences along the tracks and things like that. So the new markets, or the ones which are, I mean, they're not new anymore. The millennials and the seniors would love places like this. Somebody mentioned also that the traffic on Old 41 is already bad, and what we are going to be doing for that. We said that we're not going to be doing anything about that, that actually it's, to some extent, it's positive that there is traffic, because this traffic will support some of the businesses. We want people to be going through your downtown slowly. This is not a highway. It is basically your main north-south main street. This is your main street. So people, you want to capture them there. And if they have to be slowed down, they should be slowed down. Or otherwise they can take some of the other streets. And also, the beauty of the downtown, it is a connected network. And people, we don't want them to be, polluting or driving like crazy through your residential streets, but there is the possibility of choosing other alternative routes. It's not like the rest of Bonita Springs, where we have a lot of discontinuity because of the some of the the bedroom communities and larger commercial developments. So I believe that this is. Oh, okay. So this is the last slide, I believe, which is basically the moving forward. So we are 1 or 1.5 months within the first phase, the phase 1, which is the assessment, analysis, and code outline, which I presented today in a very kind of general terms. And then the next phase will be basically a drafting of the new, the language, and it will be the drier part and the technical, and where we will be spending more time with staff going over metrics and all of that. And then the phase 3 will be the finalizing of the new zoning regulations, and I believe that the last one, phase 4, the adoption process is to be determined somewhere in the future. So with that, I believe that's it.
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Council, what's your pleasure? Amy, do you have a question
Well,
or
I
comment?
have sort of a comment on the area for the bamboo property. Like in my dreams, I had hoped that we could do something really spectacular along the river. Would that be possible? I mean, how would you, encourage that kind of thing? Like some kind of a promenade or
We were showing, unfortunately, our renderings were not that spectacular, I guess, if you if you're asking for that. But we were more focused on the yield, on the kind of yield of the property, how
Right.
much stuff you can put there.
Right.
We know that this is the desire, and we showed actually discrete restaurants and activities along the water
Right.
with only pedestrian access. This is the desire. This is not basically real design. It is basically a study or analysis. So a concept, yes. Definitely this will be the attraction part of the project. But
That is part of you had two phases you approved. This was the phase one, but you also subsequently had the future design of the bamboo property. So this is the analysis of what they can actually fit on the property, consistent with the comprehensive plan, and then they're going to be, as the mayor says, drilling down to the actual design elements so that you'll be able to review those and provide comments on those.
actually, we would like to hear more feedback on those. And we submitted, I don't know how much of it is shared, so we can move on with the lesser number of options.
Yes, so staff is looking through those and looking at how they're consistent with the comprehensive plan as well, be providing more feedback. And at that point, we'd probably need to bring those more narrowed down suggestions back to council. And then the next step would be getting into the details of the looks and the feel of how it interacts and the placement. And they also have examples from other cities that they've interacted, the placemaking with the river as well.
I'd like
Oh,
to,
the river,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Peter.
I'd like to try to figure out a way to speed this up, and I'm actually thinking that it would be best to focus on the core area, meaning Old 41 per se. In other words, a lot of what you've talked about here, I understand different different transect and the housing behind it. But in the interest, one thing I'm concerned about is that we're not. My whole idea with respect to this was to speed up development, all right? And the basic beauty of a form-based code is you speed up development by giving a clearer view of what you want. So people aren't guessing, like they're guessing under the zoning code, the last guy spending years in here. And I think if there's some way to do it, to focus first on Old 41 proper, and get that sped up and get a consensus on council with respect to that, and then deal with going back further. Because otherwise, we're talking about almost 2 years here, and I think that's way too long. And I think part of it is just you're being asked to deal with a much bigger area than just Old 41. Just one person's idea.
Council, Greg?
No, I have to agree with Peter. I mean, even as he said, Old 41 proper, even if we just concentrated on the real downtown area, as you showed it, let's even say from Kentucky to till Terry Street, if you concentrate on that area versus the whole east and west and the far ends of it. And
At least as a start.
Yeah, as a start. Yeah, we're going to look at that later, but right now let's concentrate on that since, that's what we're trying to do. We want to put that anchor right there, let's say at the bamboo area, and we want that anchor, then everybody else will fill in around it with that. And with that, you've made a couple comments about, clear and concise direction, and this is what form-based codes, but still, if we have a should or a shall in there, it still leaves that door open. So my question is, who's going to make those determinations on the shoulds? At one point, you made the comment about it won't have to go before zoning. Who is going to make those shoulds? Like, you should put 6 trees in here. We're happy with 5, but you should put 6. Who's going to do that?
There will be a choice for them not to do it, and they will have the right, and nobody is going to basically. The shall they have to do, and it's like it will be mandatory. But the should is like if there is no market for something, we cannot force it. And from our experience, you have to leave the door open for things not to happen. For example, if you put shall for, as I said that about the retail along, Old 41,
Right.
it's not probably going to happen, in the entire length. And this is something which we can discuss with you. This is our idea that
No, I
we should not do
understand
it.
that, yeah.
Mhm.
But I do agree. Obviously, we've completed Old 41 in the last, year and a half. It's been done. And now we're another I mean, according to this, almost 2 years away before we really even.
Well, we can speed it as fast as you want.
Oh, tomorrow.
That's for us. It's not a problem. The speed of these phases. I mean, we have basically based it on other places. You know, more or less takes that much. You know, going back and forth and drafts and all of that. But we can speed up. And also another thing about the residential areas, the T3 and the T4 on
Right.
both sides. Actually, they will not be that difficult because
right.
the T3 restricted actually stays as it is. It's only mapped with a different
Well, I was
color.
wondering about
Yeah.
that, but okay.
Yeah, it
alright.
is. We heard loud and clear that nobody wants to touch anything there.
No.
So
But
it's
I just
basically
think,
translating it.
let's
Mhm.
not concentrate on that. Those
Yeah,
can be
these are
unfortunately
given.
afterthoughts or down the road thoughts.
Yeah, no, and I'd have to agree. I mean, you know, you mentioned something about conditions or the market or what have you, and I think maybe that's one thing. You know, does the dog wag the tail or does the tail wag the dog? Well, we've got, you know, as this is another 2 years, what are market conditions going to be like in 2 years? And I know that is the beauty or the trick of all of this, right? To match this process with what's going on with the realities of the economy. So having said that, you know, everything's cyclical. The economy's been good for a while, so I would hate to drag this out too long and then get everything perfect
And then,
and
the
then have a
economy
bad
will-
economy.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
And I know there's
Well,
an
but
ebb and a
this,
flow to all of
yeah,
that. I understand that, but.
I mean, this is the natural way of things, you know, and we
Mhm.
have seen this with our form-based codes for more than 25 years, you know, and they go, you know, through the ups and downs of the economy. But if you stick with your vision, and
Mhm.
it's not ours, we just give you basically the mold through which you put your vision. And you say, okay, we want this, and this is how it will look, and we just put it for you, we package it for you, and you hold on to it.
Right.
But with some internal flexibility, you have to know that flexibility is good. You don't need to corner yourself with only, you know, with only single choice. Then it's actually these places where they had the vision and they were consistent. They went through the ups and downs fairly successfully. And I mean, you know, it's in Naples and West Palm Beach and Fort Myers and other places. You know, they had like moments of a kind of doubt and, you know, a kind of slowing down. But the good things like good streetscape and good buildings, and it's basically value which remains through the ups and downs of the market.
Wonderful.
It's the question is, you know, how to make sure that we create something which is good for the next generation and the generation after.
Right, right. Anybody else? Mike?
So how fast can you get this done?
Well, I mean, we can discuss. We can definitely speed it up. Actually, today I looked at this. I'm like, wow, that's very long. This, I mean, I shared
Can
with
we get it in
everybody.
less than a year?
I think definitely. We have had some records, you know, for really fast
And
approvals and all of that. If the community is behind it and we work out the language and the metrics and the numbers and all of these things, it's not going to be difficult, definitely.
well, and then I think the other big thing is, you know, timing more so for the bamboo and the 11 properties. So I think that task we need to get done, you know, even before this. You know, we need to
Okay.
get them on the, you know,
Absolutely.
going right now.
Yeah, sure,
'Cause
definitely.
if
We
miss,
will
you know, if
love
we miss
orders
the
like this.
timing, you know, we could be waiting another decade before we have somebody that wants to build anything.
We
out,
would
so.
love orders like that. Just do it as fast as you can, definitely.
So I just want to clarify, if that's the direction of council, currently staff's approved for the first phase, we do have the remaining proposal for phases 2, 3, and 4, which we previously provided to council back in November. I'm just wondering if that's the direction you'd like us to the next meeting to bring the change order for
Yeah.
Yeah.
for the
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
back.
And to get going on the RFPs. I want to see them out real soon.
Okay.
But we're not going to do the RFP before we have an idea what we want, right? We're not just, it's not a grab bag we're doing, I don't think.
No.
No.
All right,
We have to have the vision.
right.
Well, I mean, the form-based code is based on what we have down there already, so, you know, you could write the RFP based on what's there, because that's what the form-based code's gonna be.
Yeah, but I'd hate to do the RFP, then it changes,
Right.
and then they're under one assumption. Let's get the form-based code done and then throw the RFP out.
Because it has to be
Or issue it.
integrated with the rest of the.
Right, they gotta know what
This can't be
what the RFP is
isolated.
based on. They gotta know that. They can't, I
Because
wouldn't,
they will be complying with the code, they probably need to know the code.
that's what I mean. I would hate for them to bid on an assumption, then in the 11th hour, we
Get a line
change that
change.
assumption.
Get a line change.
Yes.
But I mean, currently, anybody could come in and build something down there. We're not holding them until this is done. There's no,
Right, RFP, we own though. That's city people's property.
yeah, but, you know, if they come in with something and we're happy with what it looks like, then we should be fine with it. But we get to decide what's going there, you know, that's why it's an RFP, so. I'm just saying it's the faster the better, so I mean.
Yeah, no, and I hear you there, everybody, and I think we have, do you have clear direction? Arlene, do you have any other questions in terms of what everybody's saying here? Fred, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that this is good, but I think that we need to take 2 or 3 projects we've already approved, and before we approve this, get them to run the form-based code on those projects and see what they could do and what they can't do. And then that's part of the presentation when we approve this.
To make sure the current projects would still meet the.
Well, I mean, there's one project that I don't think is too damn good, but then there's at least 2 others that are pretty good. I think we ought to run them, because otherwise, unless we're all geniuses, and I don't think we are, you don't know what it's gonna look like till you apply it to some of the projects that went through there that we approved or disapproved or whatever.
But for the next meeting, is everybody up here on council happy
Yeah.
that we're gonna get a timeline,
A quicker timeline.
quicker timeline,
Yes,
and?
so I understand for the
Quicker
next
timeline.
meeting, we're going to bring back
Right.
the change order to the existing contract we have to include the remaining steps and an amended amount of time for each of the projects to occur. And I did want to clarify with John Domer, as you understand, we have an overlay in our comprehensive plan for the downtown. The intent of this project is not to increase the density or the restrictions within that, but there may be a need in the future amendment of the comprehensive plan specifically for the downtown and relates to the overlay district as it's represented within the comprehensive plan, but we need to bring more information back on that.
Okay, great. Council, anything else?
One last quick question. If it can be done, if there's some way to activate that industrial area, it would be great. I just think of what's happened down in South Naples with respect to the food carts, for an example. Not that I'm saying I want food carts, but it would be great to get something more generic going there.
Yeah, that is a nice area down there.
Yeah.
With that
You're talking about down,
Industrial street.
Industrial.
get down where
industrial and.
where we approved that thing, it never
happened.
never happened.
Right,
Fortunately, it didn't happen.
right.
Okay, great, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wonderful job. That's great. Okay, we're going to move on to item 8 now, mayor and council member items. Item A is a discussion of city elections, costs, voter turnout, scheduling of the city's 2020 election, and direction to staff. This is Green Sheet 1902-032, and we have Supervisor of Elections Tommy Doyle here to speak on this. And a little bit of background here. I saw Tommy 3 weeks ago or so at another meeting, and Cape Coral had consolidated their elections. And Tommy and I discussed having a discussion tonight on consolidating elections, and I think I would just offer my 2 cents before Tommy's presentation in the sense of we have school board elections, right? We have municipal elections, we have primaries, we have elections. We're often, sometimes asked to have special elections and all of that. So I've just forever been about consolidating elections. So this isn't anything new. It's just a new topic that now seems to have some legs or warrant a discussion. So Supervisor Doyle, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. 20 years ago, Supervisor of Elections at the time disallowed any municipalities to hold their elections during even year elections, August, November, and has never allowed them since. And in order to have good faith with the cities, to help them save money, I've decided that, well, I say we, it's not only me, but my staff and I have decided that we will allow cities to tag on to our countywide state elections. Now, Bonita is already on the presidential primary, and that's when the mayor is elected. And then that election, you are tagged on. You aren't billed by the supervisor elections, and you have a really good turnout. But the other years, you have a dismal turnout, like 2010, 2014, 2018. Of course, 2018 was a very small election. It was lower. It was 2 precincts, and you were billed for $23,000 for that election, and you had a 13% turnout. Now, in 2010, you were billed $60,000. That probably was 3 districts.
GOTV, Laura, GOTV. Come on.
That was probably 3 districts, 6 precincts, and you were billed $60,000, and you had a 10% turnout. The same thing in 2014. The cost was only 30-something thousand, but you still had less than 10% turnout, which is dismal. In order to increase that turnout and save that money, if you decide you want to get on with the even year elections, dates that tag along with Lee County, state, during the presidential election and the gubernatorial year. And if you have any questions about that,
Let me ask you a question, Tommy. You said, and I'm looking at these turnout numbers, and obviously they're very low. In other words, an election in March just is not going to be, no matter what year, it's not going to be as high as a turnout in November.
No.
A straight-out comparison. March elections, lower turnout. November elections, higher turnout.
On the off presidential year. Now, in your presidential primary, you'll have a big turnout.
Which we have had.
That you have had.
Yep.
And you hadn't had to pay any money for that election. But the next year, when you're going to have hardly any turnout, and you're going to pay a price for it.
Right.
You're paying $20, $25, $30 per voter to go to the poll.
Sure.
This past election, 2018, in the primary, we had a 65% turnout for that election. And of course, Peter O'Flynn made me aware that Bonita votes, they probably they would have a higher turnout in Bonita. So, and then one thing you might want to think about, and nobody really thinks there ever will be a tie. Well, what do you do if you have a tie in March? And if it's a mayor race, you're going to have a runoff, and it's going to be a countywide, a citywide runoff. It's going to cost about probably 120,000 then, because that's all 12 precincts. There's a law in the election law that a city can, by ordinance, can change their election dates, but you can't take away a council person's time. So, in other words, if you decided to move it to 2020 August, you would add 8 months to the council's term. Same thing in 2022. So that could be a drawback, or it could not. I mean, I don't think Cape Coral had much of a drawback. They had to extend their terms 1 year. And that's only the first 2 elections, and it's back to normal.
Right. Not back to normal, back to what it is.
Yeah,
new one.
4-year
4
terms.
years.
Yeah.
Right.
I had a nice chat with Tommy today talking about this, and some of which he's reflected. One is that our turnout in the presidential primary is actually very high, 60% or more in certain districts. And the issue is in the 1, 3, and 5 on the other years. But the other thing I pointed out, and Tommy has reflected it somewhat here, is I took a look at our charter, and our charter says that the term for the mayor and council members is 4 years, as adjusted by the election date. So what I said to Tommy, my personal view is I am not comfortable unless we take it to the people extending my term by 8 months. Because in the charter, they said they wanted my term to be 4 years as adjusted by election dates. It's like if all of a sudden we heard Congress was adding another 8 months to their term, I think we'd be saying, what's with that? So I think one way to split the baby is because I totally agree with Tommy on the off years, is to do the next election in conformity with the charter, which would be abiding by the 4-year term. And then, as we have our charter review going on anyhow, and build more flexibility in. So when it gets time for 1, 3, and 5 to be elected the next 2 years, the charter will give flexibility. Last point I'd make, and Tommy said it, is technically Florida has said the city council can say, we don't care what's in the charter, we can change the dates. But I don't think that's fair by, my personal view is I don't think that's fair by the people of Bonita Springs.
Oh, it's already happened twice. I know when Martha was on, she got extended because the date moved, and then my first term got extended because the date moved.
Right.
So I mean, it's already been happening. So.
Yeah, the
Right,
presidential
so-
primary used to be in
Presidential
January,
primary,
and
right.
then it
So the
moved.
change that was made was, and it's specifically in the language of the ordinances that were adopted, that change was made only because the presidential primary date changed. So that was from January to March, March to January. It's a big difference between that, which I think is fair to say that would be as adjusted for the election date. So for example, if the presidential primary date this in 20 moved to January, I think it'd be totally fair to change the election date. But there's a big difference between that and adding 8 months to everybody's term.
Can I make
Fred?
a couple?
And then Laura, sorry.
Number one, this particular primary will not be a big one, the presidential, on the majority of the voters here, because it won't be contested. One side will be contested, the other side won't be.
You're going to have one ballot style.
Maybe not.
Say that again, Supervisor, I'm sorry?
Well, you're going to have basically one ballot style. Unless somebody comes in as a Republican, you'll have the Democratic ballot style. You won't have a Republican ballot style, so the Republicans probably won't come out.
You're not gonna have
You
as
know,
big a
I'm
turnout.
nonpartisan here, but I'm just saying facts.
So you're not gonna have the big turnout, and if you can move, I think we need to save money. I think this is a good thing. Cape Coral did it, other cities have done it, and I think we should. And we just got handed a problem that we're gonna be looking for $100 grand we don't have right now for something, maintenance.
So just to be clear, we're not saving money in the presidential primary election.
No, because
We're
you're
piggybacking.
tagging along
Nothing
with
to-
our county-wide election.
Nothing to do with saving money.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
So really, the only time we're
Still
gonna
in
save
favor
money
of
is in the 2022 election,
Right.
not the 2020.
Correct.
All right.
Laura, did you wanted to make a comment?
I disagree with Fred that we should just move ahead. I mean, we just did term limits for ourselves.
Now we want to add?
Well,
Sorry.
Well, so we then just moved the post a little bit. But it saves money, it makes it more
Doesn't save
efficient, more people will vote.
That's the big thing.
Well, I think that.
Amy, and then Greg?
I think we should stick with the current one and prepare the people for the fact that we're gonna change it in 2022. How can anybody object to that? There'd be a conversation about it. And I think 8 months is a lot, and we're not gonna save any money in 2020. There's no savings of money to go to the November election in 2020, because it's gonna be zero to us. But we could do it the next time. I mean, I'm not against doing it the next time, but I think we need a discussion about it, and where people could say, yes, it's okay, you could extend your term. It's not gonna affect me, because I'm not gonna run. But, you know, if they wanna have somebody be there for 8 extra months, which is almost, I mean, that's a long time.
Greg?
Just 2 comments. I tend to agree, since we have the Charter Review Committee, they've got time to do it. We
Right.
could put it on the ballot this year even for them to do it. I mean, I think there's time for that, or even in an off year. But anyway, we can make that comment. The other thing that concerns me, and Supervisor, I don't know if you're on board with it or supported it or whatever. I know in the last couple of, up at the state legislatures, there has been ballot initiatives, not to make the ballot so long that, voter and stuff like that. When we're adding these on, especially during a presidential election, isn't that gonna add that? And is that gonna be, contrary to what other supervisor of elections have said about the ballots are too long, people are, the amendments, the X, the Ys, and now we're gonna add 3 more races on there. One.
Yeah, but you're adding 3 races in Bonita. You know, that's your ballot style. It's not they're going to have, and then Cape Coral's adding their
Well, I
measure. So
understand
it's
that,
not
but I
going to,
mean, if
it's
you
not going to
add-
increase it. The only time we're going to really, if they start putting amendments on there, that will increase it, like this past election when they had 13 amendments. With the increased demand for vote by mail, this gets less of a problem.
Okay. Well, I just know that the
Yeah.
last few times there's always been a ballot initiative, lower the ballots, shorter ballots.
The thing
We
is,
don't-
in Lee County, we pay our vote by return mail, and we have the highest rate of return vote by mail in the state.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. I just, I don't
Yeah.
want us to be part of the problem.
Yeah.
If that's what the
Yeah.
state's looking at, all the other different supervisor elections, hey, we need to have smaller ballots.
Could we defer this till next meeting?
You have all the time in the world.
2022.
You know, you got till 2022 or 2020.
Well, 2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, what would be the cutoff to make the next election?
In March, so we're doing probably, we just sent out, we're already getting vote by mail back for the sterile election. Fort Myers Beach is in March. So you'd have to, probably by the end of the year, after November, you'd have to get something going.
So we could be on next November for the 20th.
Yeah.
Because I think the bigger thing really is the voter turnout is what we need to be focusing on. And I think moving it, if that's going to get us better voter turnout, I think that's what we should do. I mean, I'm prepared to do it tonight if we want to vote on it tonight.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Greg,
Just,
sorry.
well, I don't disagree with anything that's being said, but I think that, the charter is the charter. We shouldn't be changing the charter at every whim at a meeting of,
Exactly.
supermajority or majority. I don't have a problem with changing it, but
We're not,
and I'm not pointing at you, Mike, I'm sorry. We keep talking about voter turnout, but Supervisor Doyle just said we've got the largest voter turnout by mail. So it's not like they're over there in the ballot booth pulling it.
Yeah,
They're
but
still getting it.
yeah, I mean, in off years, in your off year, you're still, that 10% still includes vote by mail.
I understand, but
Yeah.
it just seems like.
It's just they don't take the time to even vote.
And we're not really extending the terms that are in the charter because it's still going to be 4-year terms. It's just we're moving the election date, so it's going to affect one round.
No, it's 4 years and 8 months.
It's going to affect both rounds.
Well, it's only going to affect us sitting here right now.
Right.
And then it goes back to the 4 years again.
and it will give you a big turnout because
I
the
think we're in
Republican
reruns.
side will be non-contested. And that's where, like it or not, that's where a lot of the votes come out in a presidential election. If there's not a contested primary, that side doesn't come out and vote. So you're gonna have a lot bigger turnout in November of 20, because it's gonna be non-contested in the Republican side.
I do have one caveat. So with the contracts with the city of Cape Coral, city of Fort Myers, we are limiting your ballot measures that you can put on that. For instance, in the primary, 5 ballot measures from the city, and of course, a bond measure has to be on the general. But a lot of times you can put your bond measure on the primary because you may win. You normally don't have a runoff. So, but that'll be with the contract between the city and the supervisor elections office when we make that contract.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a lot of people are gaming this as in Democrats, Republicans coming out of the not a lot of people, but in a nonpartisan election. I'm reminded of the fellow who used to sit in District 6 who held up the charter a few years ago and said, "This is my Bible." And I'm looking at something that says, my term of office is 4 years. And I don't think the people asked me to add 8 months to my term.
Great.
So I brought this forward, and I've heard a lot of discussion here, and I am comfortable making a decision. So I'm actually going to make a motion to approve this. And there's a second. Okay, is there further discussion?
Approve it. What is the,
Arlene or Derek? or Tommy, or how would, I guess I'll point to Derek.
Well, Tommy, I'll probably tell you, but you're talking about moving your November election to your 2020 election to November instead of March.
August, November, you could be on, you could, yeah. If you want to be on November, you could be on November, because you know, if you're worried about a tie, I would be on August, but
That would also reduce the term extension.
It's your big turnouts, November.
Anything else, or that's?
No, that's it.
Okay.
That's the
yeah.
request.
I mean, you could look at
if
Cape
you-
Coral's ordinance. City of Fort Myers will be, 2 weeks, will have their ordinance passed, and you could mirror that ordinance.
If this is approved, what we will be doing is we'll be changing both the interim term and the qualifying dates to match up with those.
Yes.
Whatever date that
Yeah.
is, whether it's August or November.
It'll be in fact, we'll be doing all the calendars for the clerks. They'll be just the same as the state calendar. And so all the qualifying dates will mirror those dates. You still qualify your candidates. You will still manage the campaign finances, and we will conduct your election.
Sounds great. I have a
Amy?
question. No. We will be moving the March 2020 election to November. That's what,
Or August.
Or August.
or August.
November.
I mean, November, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
To be on the regular election. But you mentioned that, when are we allowed to put our charter revision questions up? That's supposed to be
Your
2020.
charter revision questions will be in, well, we're planning for March.
Whoa.
So.
Well, you could do those on the general. I mean, on the primary. So you could do those on the
We
primary.
could do them in August.
Your current board was planning, so they would be part of the March election, so we would need some direction on that as well.
And where is the limitation of only 5 initiatives? Is that
On the
Nove-
primary, on the primary.
So we could only have 5.
You could still put your charter amendments on the March election. That wouldn't stop you from doing
We
that.
could only have 5?
You can have as many as you want.
Oh, okay.
You just pay for
Yeah, you could still do, you could still, no, you don't pay for
Pay
them.
for it.
them. In March.
Yeah, in this
what?
March you don't.
Because that's the presidential
Yes.
primary.
You could still do that,
Not this March, March of 20.
Yeah.
March 20th, yeah.
Next week.
Yeah.
I think we'd want to get some direction on that because your board is, your charter review committee is meeting on Monday. They've already started their meetings and gathering information, so they probably would like to understand their target date.
Is there further discussion? Greg?
Yeah, just, heck, now I forgot what it was. Got Alzheimer's or something. So what we're voting on, that's what it was. So we're voting on this in order to create an ordinance, then it's gonna come back to us like the normal ordinance, which would be 2 readings and blah,
Right.
blah, blah, blah,
Correct.
blah.
All the trimmings.
Okay. Is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilman DeWitt,
No.
Councilwoman Carr,
Aye.
Mayor Simmons,
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn,
No.
Councilman Gibson,
Aye.
Councilman Forbes,
Aye.
Councilwoman Carumba,
No.
passes 4-3.
Supervisor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mrs.
Appreciate
Doyle,
it.
thank you very, nice to see you both here.
Okay.
Welcome.
Mayor, would you like to
Yes.
address the charter review committee, or at this time, or you want that as separate? Would you like to deal with that as a separate time, or leave it as is?
So the other odd thing is we have a fairly short time frame in working with the charter review. Perhaps we will raise it with them next week and see what their timing is and if they have a recommendation.
Well, I would think, I mean, giving them an extra 8 months. I mean, we got one of them here. I mean,
Right.
Ultimately, they've just begun their job.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure if they're gonna be looking at a major overhaul or just, some tweaking here and there.
I'd say
But we'll let
present,
them.
let them know, obviously, and
Yeah.
give them the flexibility. Ask them, right? I mean, I would think.
yeah, I mean, even if
We
they're,
need to tell them that if they go to November, it's 5. Isn't that what he just said?
August would be 5.
August would be 5.
August, was it?
Yeah.
You guys aren't talking about.
no.
No.
August, you'd be limited
August
to
would be
5.
5, but if it's March or November is the option.
Okay, all right.
Great, thank you. I apologize. Item B is to discuss Senate Bill 218 relating to smoking and prohibiting the smoking of tobacco on public beaches. This is Green Sheet 19-02031. And I brought this forward, as some of you may have seen in the news, Senator Joe Gruters from Sarasota has introduced legislation for this current session. In fact, I spoke with one of his assistants in his office, in Senator Gruder's office, and I've also spoke to Mayor Barnett from Naples. There is, and Derek, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's a preemption, is that correct?
Correct.
By the state legislature. So in other words, we could say nicely, you know, we don't want any smoking on the beaches in Bonita Springs. However, there would be nothing we could do that would make it binding until the state removes this preemption, which Senator Joe Gruters, and I hear it has a full head of steam this session, but we'll see. But it is full steam ahead. I wanted to put it on people's radars, screens as much as anything. I didn't, Derek and I discussed this, and Arlene and I have discussed it. So I guess as much as anything, I just want to get a sense, put it on people's radar screens, get a sense of what the council thinks about this, knowing that it is going ahead of this council, this legislative session in Tallahassee, and then it would make it statewide and clear all the barriers and hurdles. And then if that goes through, Derek, help me out, then it would be our choice, or it would be state law?
Well, what ended up happening is the first preemption went into effect sometime around 2003, 4, back when cities like New York and a lot of cities were making their own regulations. And so Florida passed basically indoor smoking rules and put a preemption on local governments. In Sarasota, both the city and the county tried to skirt around that by saying, as property owners, you know, for our beaches, particularly Siesta Key, which at that time, you know, Dr. Beach had said is the best beach, whatever. And so they had said, we don't want any smoking at our property which we own. And then they put in a regulation saying cigarette butts, you know, they try to target the litter caused from smoking. Well, that case was appealed almost immediately. A decision came down at the beginning of last year, throwing it out, saying it was basically controlled. So at that point, that's the way the cities in Sarasota who are sort of driving this had led it. Now, if Senator Gruder's bill lifts the preemption entirely, then we'll have all the options in front of us, hopefully, which would be regulations at our parks, regulations at other places, or maybe they'll have a limited removal to address the issues that Sarasota was dealing with, which was the litter and the smoking at publicly owned facilities. But right now, it's a total ban. We can't regulate anywhere around the area smoking. We won't know what we'll have until that bill passes.
Right. Any thought, Amy?
Well, I have a couple thoughts. Well, do we have a problem with butts on our beaches? That's the first question. And my second question is cigarette butts. Cigarette butts. I'm sorry.
Which type, as you say, which type of butts, Amy?
Smoking butts.
You don't have to say that.
And the second, sorry, well, we need a little levity here, but anyway. Cigarette butts on our beaches. And the second one is, I have, the way, when I read in the material, they don't really have an enforcement mechanism. They just kind of jawbone them and just hope that everybody does it. So, you know, I would be concerned about getting to, I don't believe in regulations unless you enforce them, so I have a little issue with this whole process. You should go. And my third comment is, why don't we just wait and see what happens, and we don't really have to worry about it. But in the meantime, let's figure out if we have a problem, and we'll know if we have to address it.
We can talk further with Lee County on maintenance issues, but I would share with you that through we participate every year in the coastal cleanup, the International Oceanic Coastal Cleanup, and cigarette butts are a huge issue in that cleanup process. But as far as actual numbers and monitoring, we'd have to talk with Lee County Environmental to find out how they're monitoring or what the issues are. I would have Derek speak as to how you proceed with violation of the cigarette butt, because I think that there's a little bit more intensive obligation now on the officer to do that. That might be more restrictive than under this.
So you run into a situation which is, and I remember back in 07 or 08 when Sarasota County went through this, I actually called their county attorney, and it was asking questions because I work for Charlotte County, which was thinking of doing the same thing. And one of the issues that came up is, all right, there's already state littering laws, and it would be the sheriff enforcing this, and the sheriff's going to enforce that law, which has stronger teeth than a local ordinance. And so there's a question about whether the sheriff's actually going to cite anyone for littering under that ordinance and whether the state attorney would actually prosecute the cases. So that, I think that's where the issue came down to. But ultimately, the situation was, I believe, in Sarasota County, it was the ACLU that took up the case because the few people that were getting charged were homeless people. And so it was almost as if it was targeted towards them. So at this
That's
point,
our
I think our situation is we just sit and wait and see where this goes.
Yeah.
And hopefully
Right.
the legislature will take some action to allow us to address any issues, because I don't think we want to be limited to just the butts. We want to actually address the smoking itself.
Well, my 2 cents is, all the state preemption stuff, one way or another, seems to be out of control. I mean, this is, I guess, a symptom of a bigger disease. We should be able to make decisions, and I think that's what you're saying, Peter. I mean, we just had one, not to go backwards, where all of a sudden the state says we don't have to follow our charter. I mean, why are they getting involved in all this stuff? So, that's my view.
No, appreciate it, Peter. Greg?
I just had 2 comments. I agree with it. Hurry up and wait. But I guess my 2 questions are, A, let's just stop there. I mean, Fort Myers Beach, Marco Island, and other places have done the ban on the plastic straws too. I know we don't have a lot of restaurants on there. We want to piggyback onto that if we can. And the second question, I guess, would be directed towards Derek. Since Lee County kind of maintains that parking lot and that beach down there, is it really our beach to make that?
I mean,
Make that comment or make that ordinance or stop that? Are we going to have to wait on Lee County since?
No, because our jurisdiction extends out into the water. I mean, we technically have the legal authorization for prosecuting, misdemeanors, violations of city code on
We own the beach,
beaches.
just not the parking lot.
Yeah, but the parking lot, that's an issue of, that's whether they're gonna trespass someone from Lee County property. Once you get down to the wet sand, it's nobody's property, it's the state property. And at that point, it's our regulations that would control.
Okay.
Great. Council, or other questions or comments? Okay. Thanks, everybody. We'll keep an eye on that one. Thanks so much. Item C is discussion of a request from the mayor of Cape Coral to assist in legal fees incurred in the joint petition filed challenging South Florida Water Management District's proposed changes to the Rule 40E-8.2212. This is Green Sheet 1902-038, and this was, and Derek and I have had a discussion on this, and Arlene, help me out, rewind the clock a little bit. 3 or 4 months ago, prior to the election, October, I want to say, right?
Yeah.
It probably makes sense. It was October. Can you take it from here?
Yeah, and you'll recall that Mayor Wayne from Sanibel came down with a request that the city join in a lawsuit that a rule challenge to the South Florida Water Management District had changed rules regarding minimum flows and levels coming out of the Caloosahatchee. At that time, it was proposed that Sanibel's law firm, Henderson Franklin, would take the lead in the lawsuit, and they would ask for a contribution based on a budget at that time for experts and attorneys' fees of $5,000. Now, ultimately, what ended up happening was, as that case proceeded, the Water Management District fought a little harder than expected, so that caused costs to rise. But also, Henderson Franklin was conflicted out based on a perceived conflict of interest with some other water users, sugar-related companies. As a result, Sanibel no longer took the lead. There was a period of time where there was no one really taking the lead. Cape Coral, who had joined as one of the 3 primary petitioners, that was Fort Myers Beach, Cape Coral, and Sanibel, had engaged their outside counsel, Manson Bowles, a law firm out of Bradenton, with a very good record on water issues, to represent the city going forward. Now, ultimately, they also represented Sanibel. Now, they had originally put together a budget of about $100,000 when I talked to Dolores Menendez, the city attorney for the Cape. At the end of the day, the Cape picked up the tab for $180,000 for both experts and legal fees. Now, in addition to that, Fort Myers Beach used their attorneys. The city of Fort Myers attorneys were involved. I represented both Bonita and Estero in that. We were interveners in the case. The way I had arranged it to save costs for both of us, our interests are basically aligned, is I split my costs evenly right down the middle between Bonita and Estero. What that ended up being is about, I think, $11,000 to the city of Bonita Springs. But Manson Bowles, at the hearing, we had a 3-day hearing with their experts. They did the bulk of the work. We heavily relied on them, and they did a very good job. So I'm not disputing the amount of the work done. I've looked at the bills. The expert that they retained was very good, and I feel very good about the outcome of the case ultimately. But the question has been asked, well, is there an obligation of the cities to pay? And conferring with the other city attorneys in the county and with the Cape, there is no legal obligation for us to pay, but we had committed $5,000 towards Sanibel. Ultimately, Sanibel's counsel became Manson Bowles from Cape Coral, and so it's just an open question to the council, how much we like to contribute. To date, the city of Fort Myers has contributed $30,000. Fort Myers Beach is contributing up to $30,000 is my understanding. The Village of Estero, it has not come up to the council, but they had put a hard cap of $10,000 on their commitment. With the fees that I charge for representing them, that equals out to about $20,000 for the Village of Estero. All I would caution the council, and I have had this discussion with the Cape, is that the larger cities, the petitioners, all have in-house counsel. That does cost them money, but they were the leads on the case. And if you divide everything up equally, in the fact that we are also, the smaller cities tend to have outside counsel, which are charging on top of that, there's a possibility that the smaller cities actually pay more towards the case than the larger cities. So I just want everyone to be sort of aware of all those cost issues, and with that, it's really just a policy decision how much you want to contribute.
Greg, did you have a question?
Well, I just had a comment or question. I mean, and I don't even know if it's germane to the conversation, is if we add in what everybody is paid, like you said, Estero, us, Fort Myers Beach has used some of their own, add all that in there, then divide it by all the people to get a fair number, would that be germane to say, all right, look, we, in total, or in excess, or in total, we've spent, let's say for round numbers, instead of 147, we spent about $200,000 divided by all 6 municipalities and dare I even say it, throw some of the county in there. They're going to benefit from this too. Lee County is. I know they probably won't, but the conversation should be made. Why are the cities carrying the water for the counties? No pun intended.
Yeah, I mean, if this had all been worked out in a perfect world ahead of time, then some form of arrangement along those lines could have been made. I think it was anticipated originally that the amount of effort that the interveners, particularly Fort Myers, Estero, Bonita, would have had to contribute would have been less, but a lot of those costs were driven by the Water Management District.
Well, and I understand that, but it just seems, like you said, in a perfect world, but in a perfect world, we would have seen this coming. We didn't know it was coming. It goes back to Irma and Hurricane Michael. They don't know they're coming, so we don't know what the ask is going to be. But now that we know what the ask is going to be, and again, I hate to put Lee County on the chopping block a little bit, but they're going to benefit from the tourist tax, and they benefit both sides of it. If the water's coming in here dirty and we're not getting a tourist tax, it's going back up to the county just as well as it's coming to the cities and the communities of Lee County. I mean,
well, I guess what I'd only say is that we don't want to count our chickens before they've hatched. We haven't, cases
I know
haven't
we
resolved
haven't,
yet,
but at least we're fighting the fight, and Lee County is going to, whether the fight is, whether we hit a knockout punch or we get knocked out, Lee County is going to either be involved in it and going to have some skin in this game. So let's see if they can get some of the skin in the game also monetarily, because, again, like I said, to kind of reiterate, the cities are stepping up to the plate when it's a larger Southwest Florida community, not a Bonita Springs issue. As the mayor said more than one time, water knows no boundary. That water coming out of the Caloosahatchee and out of Lake Ode doesn't have a boundary where it stopped at Sanibel, where it stopped at Cape Coral. It came all the way down south and it went north and south. So,
Well, Peter, what do you want to do? You're the ones who were dealing with it.
Yeah, well, and I've been dealing with it obviously through
Right.
Arlene, and I'd like to honor our commitment, and that's where my head's at. But obviously, our original commitment doesn't sound now like it's enough. So it's. Can we agree to honor our original commitment?
Well,
I mean,
for sure.
and I know, and I'm not trying to. So now we're at 5, and I hate to sound like an auctioneer, but now we're at 5,000. Okay.
Well, really,
and
really 16 because
right,
we
and
paid Barry
actually,
Robinson
so actually
another 11,
16.
Where you going, Greg? We need you for the
Yeah,
bid.
so
We need you for the bidding.
where do we go? And
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Which is.
Yeah, because you're
I-
probably
I-
used to things like
Well,
this.
no, I
somewhat.
agree with all of Greg's sentiments, particularly with respect to the county. I agree the way that he was doing the math. However, the other two jurisdictions are already chipping in 30. So we definitely did say something like 5 or 10. But I am taken by the fact that Derek is saying these guys, or whatever their name is, Manson something or other, did a very good job. And my view is we paid 10, and I would just swallow it and say pay 20 or 25. I mean, that's what I would do. We could technically say we're sticking to 5, but then we're really doing what you're saying the other jurisdiction is doing. We're free riding on these other jurisdictions.
Yep.
So,
And if you agree to commit to, if you commit to 20, then you're at 30 right there.
right.
Okay.
Let's do 20.
Is everybody happy with that? 20 plus 10
Not
equals
happy,
30?
but not
Right,
happy, but
correct.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Wrong choice of words.
But I do have to comment that when I was reading this whole thing, I was upset by the fact that it got away from us, you know, that we didn't
well,
have control over this expenditure. And I don't know if that's just, I know you explained it very well, so I can't even be critical about that. But I think that if some similar circumstances come in the future, we have to be sure and clear about what kind of commitment we're making, because when somebody else controls the expenditures, I think it's just not good practice. So I want to just make that clear.
Amy, I
the
agree
way
with,
I feel.
absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
I mean, we got caught here and it happens, but I don't want it to happen again. So the next time, let's be a little more cautious about that. And I'm good for 20 plus whatever we pay you, and you did a good job.
And I made my point, the first point I made to the city attorney in Cape Coral was, you know, this doesn't bode well for future cooperation.
Correct.
When we're not working together at the
Right.
same time. But, so I think the message is pretty clear.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a lot of frustration amongst all the city attorneys on, you know, next time we need to make sure that we're coordinating.
So I'd make a motion to pay 20.
Second. Yeah. And Arlene?
Thousand.
So at our next meeting, we'll have a budget transfer. You have a legal contingency fund that we'll have, and we can put out as a consent agenda item for you.
Okay.
And I'll make sure to get an invoice for auditing purposes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Greg. Yeah, Greg, you had a comment.
I just want to just kind of talk to Derek a little bit about this. You've read through these bills and they're usual and customary. There's
Yes.
not, okay.
Yeah, and
Not like-
I was involved, since we were involved very early on, their strategy, the experts they hired were all very good. I have no dispute with any of the bills.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. There's a motion and a second. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Carr?
Aye.
Mayor Simmons?
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn?
Aye.
Councilman Gibson?
Aye.
Councilman Forbes?
Aye.
Councilwoman Carumba?
Aye.
Councilman DeWitt?
Aye.
Great. Okay, we're moving on now to the second reading and public hearing of the following ordinance, and public comment is allowed. Who wants to take it away?
Real quick,
Yeah.
just because Green Seat says first reading, is that,
No, is it second? Is this the first
No,
reading?
Green
this is-
Street says first, and obviously the agenda says second.
Yeah, no,
yes?
It's the
that
second.
was- that is a
Second.
typo.
Is it a third reading by any chance?
No, no.
All
I hear
right,
three,
all right.
but
Yeah,
I'll
do I
turn
hear
out.
third?
That's why John's here, I think.
But I'm gonna
Yeah.
go ahead and, I'll go
Yep.
ahead and read the title.
Yes,
one more
please.
time. An ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs approving the petition of Bonita Springs Utilities Incorporated, modifying its wastewater tariff to approve a special service charge for leisure time subdivision and providing for an effective date.
You were saying?
I wasn't saying anything.
Siri.
Siri. Alexa.
Motion to approve.
Hey, John, welcome.
Good evening,
John.
council members, mayor. Just to put it in context, BSU got into the sewer business in 1991. Actually bought the Bonita Bay wastewater plant that's over behind Prado, expanded that from 400,000 gallons a day to 2.5 million gallons a day. And in the course of doing that, went around the community and reached agreements with going on 50 packaged sewage treatment plants that were serving the condos out on the beach, the shopping centers, the mobile home parks, the RV parks. Got them all to agree to tie into central wastewater. For the most part, BSU took over the on-site collection system within those communities. However, in a few instances, BSU did not, and that may have been because there were legal issues with the turnover, or there were problems with the quality of the collection system, or what have you. And this is one of those cases. In 1993, BSU began to provide bulk service to Leisure Time, which is a park with about 200 units. And since then, for the last 25 years, the park's been owning and maintaining the internal collection system. Within the last few years, we became aware that there were some real serious infiltration issues. So rainwater, groundwater were getting into the sewer lines to the point where it was impacting our wastewater system, and it was impacting their system. So working with them over the last year or two, we've reached an agreement that they would turn over the system. We're going to spend about $200,000 to upgrade it, tighten up the system, take care of the infiltration. We're going to collect a special service charge from the residents out there, and they can pay that up front or over time. And the purpose of the ordinance is to amend our tariff in order to do that. We do have an agreement with the HOA, or the homeowner association. They have approved this. Really, it was overwhelming approval, and so we're ready to go forward pending approval by the council. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I was going to say, any
Motion to approve?
motion to approve in a second. How's that? And I was going to say, any questions for John or comments?
Just a quick comment. By
Yeah.
happenstance, I was over to look at the Spring Creek dredging, and I went by that sewer. If there ever was a pristine, beautiful sewage treatment plant, you've done it. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass that along to our staff. They work
really,
hard.
I never realized.
Good job, John. Excellent. Okay, there's been a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
We have to-
Yep, Derek, I'm sorry.
no, just
Oh,
because
public
it's
comment
public
too, I'm
comment.
sorry. Public comment. Are there members of the public here that would like to speak on this issue? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mayor Simmons.
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn.
Aye.
Councilman Gibson.
Aye.
Councilman Forbes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carumba.
Aye.
Councilman DeWitt.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr.
Aye.
Okay, excellent. But we do have public comment now for anybody that'd like to speak on anything. Members of the public, please come forward. Councilman Grant, you're going to come on up and lead us off.
Anything? Okay.
Yep,
Anything.
anything.
City-related.
First, I would like to say that
4 minutes.
we should have put in a fireplace in this place. I'm sorry. I'm a little chilly. Okay. All right. Okay. Great that we have hot coffee here. Okay. On April 30th, 1971, Southwest Florida lost daily passenger rail service. Now Lee County has a population of approximately 800,000, and Collier County has a population approaching 500,000. This does not include the permanent populations of Charlotte and DeSoto County, all of which have CSX CSX Railroad right-of-way and Seminole Gulf Railway leased railroad tracks going through the cities of Arcadia, Punta Gorda, Fort Myers, Estero, and Bonita Springs. Presently, 10% of the population of the United States travels on Amtrak passenger trains on a yearly basis. If we could lobby for a Southwest Florida extension of Amtrak's auto train service from Washington, D.C. to Sanford, Florida, which is 240 railroad miles from the city of Bonita Springs, which sits on the Lee-Collier County line. I strongly believe such an extension of passenger rail service would cause 200 people a day to use either a northbound or southbound Amtrak auto train 7 days a week, 365 days a year, which could also carry 48 sedans and 32 SUVs, as well as 24 dogs and cats, and a dozen bikes on baggage kennel cars. This would be a win-win situation for CSX Transportation, Seminole Gulf Railway, Lee and Collier County, as well as Charlotte County, and would certainly not hurt the financial bottom line of downtown Bonita Springs merchants. As a former city council member, I know that there is a regional Southwest Florida
meeting of the Florida League of Cities sometimes on a monthly basis. Please bring this idea to your fellow city council members in Collier, Lee, Charlotte, and DeSoto counties. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Grant, thank you very much. And I would just, because you brought it up, speak with Councilman Forbes. He's the voting member with the Southwest Florida League of Cities, okay? He's our voting member. Thank you, Councilman Grant. Thanks for being here. And Kathy, welcome. How are you?
Hello again, everybody. For the record, Kathy McGrath. Just two quick questions, and the first one has to do, because someone mentioned it to me, and that has to do, they said, what's going on with the tenant for the restaurant at the Wonder Gardens? And I remember at a meeting a month or so ago, it was on the agenda and there were some proposals, and I know you gave direction to staff, but I can't remember what it was. It was either to consider them or look for more or make a decision. So that's the only thing. I just wondered, I thought maybe next month or so someone could come back and see how it's proceeding.
Yep.
And the only other thing is, again, I want to remind you the importance of public access at the Weeks property. I noticed there was a letter in the paper today, and Jim Weeks is the one you have to really listen to, because it's not just public access, but it's also parking. There has to be adequate parking for the public. I realize that the developers, they're going to invest a lot of money and build a real quality thing there, but we can't leave out the fact that the public has to have adequate parking. And I don't mean a satellite place where they can bus people there or, transfer them back and forth. Just consider that when it comes up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Other members of the public that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, we are moving on to the city attorney's items.
The only item I have for you is some good news. Anglers Paradise has withdrawn their comprehensive plan challenge that was scheduled for hearing later this month. They had done so, I think, in order to gain some goodwill, because we are working on a framework agreement to work out an alignment through their property. So with that done, the comprehensive plan is now in effect. Our moratorium will start to be wound back fairly soon. Under the terms of the moratorium, the two things that are required is that the comp plan amendment passes, which is now effective, and two, that we start some implementing land development regulations. So I'll be working with Mr. Dolmer to see how far along we can get in that process so we can remove the moratorium on Bonita Beach Road. And I will bring the framework agreement for Anglers Paradise, hopefully bring that to you at your next meeting.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Arlene, city manager's items.
First off, I'd like to address the addendum item we have. We wanted to provide you with a very brief update on the city staff's initiated project, stormwater management data collection, and John Dolmer is going to come forward. At the conclusion of the brief update, we are going to ask for some direction from council on two items that we've detected that would be helpful to us as potential amendments to the land development code in implementing, making sure that our best practices and management of new development is followed when we're looking at these new stormwater structures as well.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is a very quick update as right now we
John, I'm sorry, I can't get that to stop.
Is my time up? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right.
Put that on for him.
Sorry, you're wrapping up here now, John. Yeah, right.
Thank you
And
for
in
your time.
conclusion, in
Yes,
summary?
sir.
Yeah.
If you remember correctly, the first time we had a discussion, we had zoomed in on this section right here to talk about how the data collection for both environmental resource permits and development orders would take place. We also said we were going to generally work in an east to west direction, and what you see in this map is the black hatching shows areas, oh boy,
Completed.
where we have completed, yes, thank you. The glasses are not quite strong enough. And the blue areas, which are just to the west of 75, are those areas that are under review right now. Now, what this means is that the data has been collected from the permitting agencies, whether we were a permitting agency, whether the Water Management District was, or Lee County. Once that is complete, we still need to convert this data into a GIS database, and then that database needs to be formatted so that we both have internal and public access to that information, because as we all know, the main goal of this was that the citizens would be able to figure out how a stormwater system functioned within the overall city system and what portions of that infrastructure were maintained by their community, if they lived in such a community, and what portions of the infrastructure was maintained by the city. So this is the type of format that we are getting, and what it basically outlines is permits, the location, and some general other information that will go into the database as we're going to be completed with it. This format, will, like I said, will then be turned into more of a GIS format that is much more visually appealing and understandable. So to get to the point of what Arlene had just talked about, in our review of these and in our discussions of this plan, we were looking to make a couple of changes. And one of those changes was to look at requiring as-built surveys for projects as they are completed. The reason for this is it's been brought to our attention for some projects that were previously permitted and under construction. Sometimes they build those projects the way they should, sometimes not.
Not so much.
And what we would be looking for those projects that we're permitting now, and as they are completed, we'd require surveys that show exactly what's in the ground and where it's located, so we can maintain compliance with that as we go forward, and also ensure compliance with what was permitted. The second item would be to look at some modeling that would be required for stormwater, and that is the ICPR4 model. That system is currently used by both the city and the county of Sarasota, as I understand it, and it provides quite a bit of information in terms of both groundwater and superficial stormwater drainage. So what we would be asking for is the ability for us to explore that and bring that requirement back to you, and what that would include. Under a brief search of Google, it appears that one license for that system that we would need is right in the range of $2,400 per year. So not a lot of money. We will need to have someone that understands this system, that's going to be able to review the models submitted by applicants, and if we go forward with it, there's going to be some workload adjustments and things that we need to figure out of how this is going to be done. The main thing that we want to convey to this council is, as we permit projects, we want to make sure that what we're permitting is going to function within the overall system, and that seems to be the goal of not only what we're collecting from previous permits, but also what we're doing under current construction. So I don't know if there's any questions on this. I know that's very vague, but at this point we're still trying to formulate a lot of the data. Yes, ma'am.
Let me see if I got this straight. This, yeah,
Which, do you want me to go back?
No, I just want to see if I'm looking at the same thing you are and I am. So what you've done with this information is that you've pulled up the stormwater management plans for all these areas that you have identified here. So they would tell you you had to put a pond here or this conveyance there or something like that.
Yes, ma'am.
So that in order to determine the flow of the water, you have to examine each one of these and then integrate it with the modeling, or how are you using this, I guess is the question.
Well, there's two things. One is, to answer your question, when we're analyzing these permits, that information, when we format it into a GIS database, that information will then be there. In terms of the modeling information, part of that's already been done by the University of Florida. Part of that would have to be filled in by an applicant as they were requesting a permit. So right now I can't exactly show you where the line is because we're still trying to figure out who's who and what's what. But what we do know is that there currently is not modeling associated with permits that are submitted to the city for private development projects. And what we'll be looking at is, as we go forward, maximizing what we have in terms of infrastructure and making sure that what we permit actually functions, not only within the site itself, but also as it works its way into the Gulf.
That's the part I don't understand how you're going to connect it. I mean, these individual plans, you know, you could just analyze it, but how do you connect this, you know, for example, this one application with all the others?
If I may, we have an ICPR model, which the model that John's talking about, it was completed in the city in 2010. by a firm named Intera, and it's currently being updated to the ICPR 4 version, which is just a software upgrade with the work that's going on to model the flooding. So existing developments and how the water moved through those existing developments was modeled back then. What John's talking about is new developments that are coming in are not providing that little subcomponent. They're not providing that modeling to add to our model. And what he's considering or asking to consider is that be incorporated into a new process where applicants would submit that data, and that data would be reviewed for consistency to make sure it doesn't have any negative downstream effects in our existing model.
Existing things are already modeled, is that what you're saying?
There is an existing stormwater model that shows how stormwater runs through the city. Yes, it was.
So this is all for $2,500?
Well, there's a couple of things going into this. What I quoted you was if we were to purchase a license of the software, that's what it is. That doesn't include the time, people that are associated with reviewing, modeling, creating. That's just to get into the software.
You know, and I think the particular ask that John's making is he's asking for direction to go ahead and upgrade our submittal requirements immediately.
So moved.
And then if we need to implement any land development regulations, to bring those forward as well.
There's been a motion and a second. Further discussion, Fred.
Yeah, I think this is great. I think there's one thing you need to do, though, and that is we've got systems that were permitted in 1993 and earlier, and I just found this out the hard way, but when they go in and get an amendment to the permit, when they add into, let's say you have a shopping area that's only 25% built out, when they go in to get permits to build the rest of the thing, all they have to submit to South Florida Water Management, and that's all they do. They submit the stuff on the new pipes they're adding, and the system is presumed to have worked perfectly, even though the 2010 models that the city ran in that master plan shows that it was failing, would fail in things like we had with Irma. So you need to also have them update anything of a major expansion within an already existing stormwater system.
So that's why you want to get on top of this, right?
Yes, correct. And
That's the
there'll be
whole idea.
There'll be
The whole
further
thing-
steps we need to bring
Right.
forward. For example, the modeling, we'll have to ask for some direction
Well,
on
no,
that
she's
as well.
talked about it before. In other words, if I recollect, that once they understand it, there are regulations that Derek can help them
Correct.
to provide a certain entree to address the issues like Fred's raising and other issues as well.
Exactly.
Right.
Is that fair?
Exactly. To
Okay.
confirm what Councilmember Caramba was asking, another important component of gathering this data is so that we can understand if it's functioning correctly, and then that information can be driven down to neighborhood services, which can then work through code enforcement and other issues that we need. So there's many facets of why we need this data.
I understand the data, but I'm going back kind of to what Fred's saying. Let's use Bonita Exchange, since it's a newer thing. If
Use X.
well, yeah, but, but 5 years from now, they decide to finish the project. Can we then go back and say, well, we had you design it this way, now, based on new statistics, it's not going to work that way, now change it and retrofit it?
That's another
Well,
issue.
and so, you know.
And I think that's what Fred's trying to say.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, because they didn't model it back then.
Right.
They made assumptions, and now the models show a lot of those assumptions didn't quite
Can you go
work. They
back
can
and
be fixed for not a
prospectively
lot of
make some
money.
changes?
Well, so I mean, this is all part of the umbrella of us trying to get a hold of stormwater.
I understand,
again.
I'm kind of drilling onto what Fred's
Well,
asking.
so I think the direction that I'm writing down from this is we have direction to update our submittals right now.
Exactly.
We have direction to look at our land development code, see what we can change. And in that update, I would put in, you know, are there inflection points during reviews of existing developments where we can say, yeah, maybe we're not looking at stormwater today, but you're doing enough that we're gonna trigger a stormwater review to make sure that you're bringing your system into compliance, and at least get the submittals. We may not hold up whatever the work they're doing is, but we get the submittals, then if we find they're non-compliance, we can start the process. So we're gonna look at all those issues. The idea is to get the data in now, and then we'll address how we
A
move
lot of
forward with
catch-up.
it.
No, I understand the ketchup, and I agree with ketchup. I'm just worried about,
And mustard. No, sorry.
yeah, some mustard, a little bit of mayonnaise in there.
Spicy mustard,
Yeah.
much better.
My concern is that, you know, what developments that have already submitted and they've been approved with whatever drainage it is. And now, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years later, it's not working. It's built to specs, and it's built to the specs is what John and them approved, but now, because of modeling, because of drainage, because of other buildings, whatever, it's not flowing like we would like it to. Do we have the right to make them change that?
I think
Or is that a question to be answered down the road?
It's a very fact-based scenario, but I would say in a large percentage of situations, the answer is yes. Where we are going to have the real problems is in the older subdivisions that haven't renewed their HOAs, and we have ownership issues as well. And that's where, when we come into our management part of it, the stormwater management side, you know, when if we move forward with the fees and we start raising money, that's where we're gonna be able to say, okay, now we've modeled the situation. Are we going to ask those subdivisions to turn over their systems to us? Are we gonna try to do that? That way we can fix the problem? Or are we gonna take assessments in order to fix the problem downstream? But, you know,
Well,
I
and
think
that's
these are all things we're gonna have to deal with.
And that's kind of what I'm going with it. Even if you're looking at a DRI or something like that, they were modeled
Way
after
back.
this, way back when. Now we're finding out, and I'll pick on Fred's place. If it's not all the way built out, now Hunter's Ridge is not up to snuff.
Right.
Can we go back and tell them?
Well,
I think they need to.
the bottom line is
research,
we're
right?
very, very
Yeah.
early,
Yeah.
and so a lot of this is still starting to gel. But the bottom line is, if somebody still owns property, I think Derek's answer holds. Where I think it becomes more complicated, and we can go in a number of different scenarios, is if the property's been sold, property's been parceled off, if there's an HOA that hasn't been maintained, there's a lot of different situations that can make that more difficult. It's not to say you can't make them do it, it's just that there may be a much more difficult process to get to that point. And I think that with your blessing, we're looking to clarify that, so that way, getting to that point, if it comes up, is not as difficult as it is today.
Yeah, and Fred, before you say that, I mean, right, there are, and Peter knows this, and probably Amy, even in your subdivision, there are lots in Bonita Bay available, right, to build on. Not many, but there are a couple, right?
Yeah, but.
So
what-
is the neighborhood complete or not complete?
Well, let me say this. The bigger areas are where you have a commercial development that was started being built in the mid to early 90s. Maybe they only built 25, 30%. On paper, the system that they put in was supposed to work when it got fully developed, but as the better modeling has come out, it wouldn't. And so when those situations, you've got a big tract of land that's not developed, so the developer's getting a lot of money to develop that, and it's not gonna cost a lot to fix it. But if you let him go ahead and build onto it and not fix it then that's when you're gonna get into the pushback.
Yeah, and we're talking.
I think we have the question, right? And the answer is you're gonna.
Yeah, and
you gave us,
we're talking a lot
kinda.
about vested rights and things like that, but
Right.
the truth is, a lot of these projects, I mean, Lee County has had stormwater management programs on the books going way back into the 70s. And so even some of the oldest developments we have in Bonita had development order conditions that if they're not being met, then you're not vested to anything. So we go back and you say, you're
Yeah,
complying with the old
that's a
system.
no-brainer.
Now, when you need to
And
do
many
something, you
probably
need to come up to a new system. And we'll have to have some kind of relief mechanism, but we'll work all that out
Yeah.
as we get the data.
Last call,
Well,
Fred?
last call, and this, first of all, you have all kind of properties in Bonita, to our credit, that even though we were the third worst flooded area in the state, did not really flood or have water on the roads. But we have a lot of properties around those areas that didn't flood, even with Irma, which I'd call the acid test. So you don't want to let development that people could do on an old system cause a community that didn't flood.
Right.
What would Bonita Bay think if they got flooded because something got built around it? That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
That great point. Anything
Coming
else?
from the colony, it'd be all right.
Any other comments?
Just quick, and I make it
Yeah,
real
Peter,
quick,
yeah.
which is, I'm real interested in knowing the difference between, this is a good point that's been made also, what's public and what's private. And you have to answer that.
Yeah.
And a perfect example is the big thing that we have is number one, which is to take water down Logan, is properly to help 3 gated communities that have private systems on the south side. We're doing it in the public swale, but what's public and what's private there? It's just an observation. It's not really, so it's tricky. But I think as we go forward, properly, there are going to be other communities that say, well, we may be private, but there's a public aspect to what we're doing here.
And what's currently designated, what this council wishes to do, those are a lot of
Well,
options
that's
on
a
the
judgment
table.
call, so,
Yes.
but I mean, it's an important judgment call on what you're doing. I don't have an answer, I have a question.
Yep. Council, anything else on this? Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Great work.
Good work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, item A, Arlene?
Do we need a vote on?
Yeah, you want to
I
vote?
think we got direction. I don't.
We had a
think-
one- we had a
I know
second
you had a
and all that.
motion and a second.
Oh, okay.
Motion and a second.
Well, we
had
got a
direction.
motion and a second. Do we need to go anything beyond that?
I don't think.
If you would, then we could
Yeah.
surpass
She
the
likes it.
permission to advertise.
Further discussion?
No.
Roll call, please.
Oh,
Councilman O'Flynn.
Aye.
Councilman Gibson.
Aye.
Councilman Forbes. Councilwoman Carumba.
Aye.
Councilman DeWitt.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr.
Aye.
Mayor Simmons.
Aye.
So with that confirmation, we would not have the permission to advertise. We'd go straight to first reading of the ordinance.
Okay.
The other item we have before you is we've started, we'd like to start the budget process earlier. This year, we talked about how we had our budget retreat in November and looking to have a CIP meeting with the council in March. We have a tentative date looked at as Monday, March 25th. We did not put a time to start, whether evening or day, but we wanted to start the discussion on these dates. If it's getting too late in the evening, we understand we could, if you want to look at calendars, and we could put this again on the next agenda, but we wanted to start the process so we can start announcing the dates, and also it is important for our finance department to make sure we're not in conflict with the school board in Lee County, so we would be looking at that September 4th and September 19th. Another addition would be, is previously we had looked at our meetings in July, the first meetings in July, we'd like to move the first meeting with staff going over the budget into June. I just wanted to make sure that didn't conflict with other calendars over the summer.
I already looked at it. I can't do 1 or 7. 1, I'll be in Denver.
Okay.
And 7, I'll be in Kenya. I'll really be out of.
Can't call in by phone on that 7 one.
No, I don't think so. I'll be lucky. I'll be lucky if I'm alive. Let me put it that way.
We absolutely have flexibility with 1, so that's.
Yeah,
we just-
but I'm leaving on the 23rd, so I'm going to be away a whole week, so
What about 7, Arlene?
Where are we, in September?
September, yeah.
Flexibility with that date.
It's got to be so many days after the original.
Yes.
Was it 14 days or something like
But
that?
normally by the.
Ann Wright will tell us, won't you, Ann?
Normally
I
by
know
the
she will.
7, it's
Number
pretty
7 is
pro
September
forma, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't, the 7 is not bad to miss because we're already decided everything.
Right, but 7 is, I hate to
7
say
is
a
That's a
formality,
hopefully
but
a
it is
confirmation.
a formality.
Seventh is Saturday.
No, it's
No, number 7.
Oh, I'm sorry, the numbers, Peter. 1, 2,
She's-
3, 4,
Number
5, 6,
7.
7.
She's looking at-
I'm sorry, yeah.
Fancy.
In terms of the dates, yeah.
The September 19th.
The 19th.
I'm
This
out.
is, we're coloring by numbers.
So, Amy, if you're,
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be bad.
That's,
I was just gonna say, Ann, do we have flexibility in that date? We do. To accommodate Amy?
No, I don't, it's going to be hard because I'm going to go from the 13th to the 28th, I'll be gone.
Yeah. But like you say, it's a
Not that
formality.
flexible.
Right.
it's a formality, that one.
I think you should just pass me on that one because I
Okay.
don't think it matters. No.
Boy,
that's what
imagine
I'm
how easy that meeting's gonna be. Holy cow, no, I'm kidding.
saying. It'll only be one.
But nothing can change anyway,
It'll
Amy.
only be 1/7 difference.
Very
And I'll
good.
have plenty to say on the 4th,
There we go.
all right?
Awesome.
All right, I have a request.
Sure.
Throw one in here, 2 actually. Is there any way we can take the June meeting and make it closer to either of the 2 scheduled council meetings, like the day before or the day after, rather than the middle, the 12th? So I think the 2 June council meetings
Do we have a date?
are on the 5th.
Where's
Yeah, I'm looking at what Mike's
Oh, June.
properly directed me to here. Yeah, number 3, June 12th. I'm asking if that can be moved to the 4th or the 6th, in other words, flanking the 5th or the 18th.
Flanking our council weeks,
Correct,
one way or another,
correct.
yeah.
Or flanking the 19th, 18th, or 20th. Would that be?
Is that
all right?
okay too? Okay, that's okay as well,
All right.
Peter.
Whatever,
It'll come
June.
back next month.
The idea is to flank the council meetings. And we're really gonna do one the day before the 4th of July? Oh, that's a
Well, that's a discussion because
That's Councilman.
that's
Oh.
a city council meeting, so I
Alright.
don't, if we need to discuss it, we usually put that on the agenda, whether
Mhm.
you'd like to change that date or.
Whether we do that meeting at all, anyhow.
Or not
Last
do
year
it.
we didn't.
Right,
Or-
right.
So-
You guys want to do a meeting July 3rd? It's, you know.
No.
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 Okay. So so if we didn't have the meeting July 3rd, what would the flexibility, we have flexibility there too?
Yes, on that one we do.
I would.
Okay. Can we do that late June?
I'd rather do it, if you don't mind, we just spitballing this here? I'd rather
Yeah,
do it,
no.
I'd rather do it a little later or in July.
Okay, and then, so I'll,
Like-
where I get into difficulty
Right,
is,
yeah,
as
where-
Ann, as Ann knows,
Right.
the 17th
Right?
of July is perfect.
Oh,
The 18th of July through about the 28th or 29th or 30th of July are horrible for me.
well, why don't we do it the 16th?
16th.
The
Yeah.
16th, Peter?
Sure, absolutely.
So do it July
16th.
3rd becomes
16th.
July
Yeah.
16th?
And are you canceling your regular meeting for the 3rd?
I would.
I would, yeah.
So 4 becomes
So we'll
July
move-
16. Is that what we're saying? Good.
Yeah.
And I'm at a tough spot too. It's hard to believe on the face of this earth you can't get cell phone reception, but I won't be able by phone if we do
Good,
it.
that's
Yeah,
good for
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. No,
Get a
it's
satellite
wonderful, but
phone.
yeah.
That's what I'm getting.
But as long as we can be mindful of the 17th and look at it the 16th, that's great. That's
16th.
fabulous. Wonderful.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Not that I have a problem with any of those dates. Is that gonna give us enough time to talk, because we're gonna need to set the millage on the 17th
Of,
of July. That's what it says, require a vote on tentative millage.
that's the maximum. Yeah.
We're changing that to the
We're changing that to,
to the 16th.
No,
No.
we're keeping that the 17th. We're having a meeting the day before it to talk
I
about.
think so. The heavy lifting is the first meeting, really,
Yeah.
especially the way Arlene did it last year. The heavy meeting is the.
Heavy lifting's gonna be on
First-
the
first-
number
the
3
first
one, which
meeting,
is
yeah.
one in June, that we're gonna do.
Yeah, or
between
even,
the 5th
depending
and
upon
6th.
what she's doing, even March perhaps, I don't know
All
what
right,
she's planning.
sounds good. I just wanted to make that comment. that
Right.
We'd have one day to really come back and say, are we gonna lower millage, or we keep it the same, or are we
Right.
gonna raise it?
Right.
We could do the 15th if you want to have an extra day.
No,
That's a
I'm
Monday.
just,
I could hardly wait for that discussion again. Oh, goody. When do we get to have that? What
Yeah,
day's
yeah,
that gonna be?
Don't worry, we'll get the pinata out for you, Peter. You can whack it.
Whack, whack.
You don't want to do the
Whack-a-mole.
15th? It'll give us an extra day. We could do the 15th.
well,
It's
it's not,
Monday.
it really doesn't matter, I
Well,
guess. I was thinking like a
Oh.
2 or 3 weeks to
Oh,
really
no.
drill
Done?
down.
We done?
That's all.
But I think this is good, right?
Yeah.
We're good now with the
We're-
adjustments?
Yeah.
Yep. No,
Excellent,
We wanted
Arlene.
to have the conversation now, sooner than later for
We had it.
calendars.
They'll bring it
and-
back, what we discussed.
Yes, we'll bring back in the next meeting what we discussed, but, and we'll also bring back in the next meeting if you'd like to cancel the July 3rd, so we have it by
No, we
motion.
already said we were.
Yeah.
I think you
Yeah.
need, when we cancel the meetings, if we have that by motion,
Okay.
so
we'll
we
do-
can advertise it.
Okay.
We'll get to that.
All right, and then you have item B, I think, Arlene. Authorize staff to refund 101-27720.
Yes, I'm going to ask John Dahmer to come forward. This is an agreement with Bonita National that was where they paid their impact fees in advance so that, under the current rate, so that they were able to move forward with their permits. And then they conducted an independent fee study on transportation, is for their internal clubhouse, but I'll have John go through the specifics.
Or Jacqueline.
Actually, it's me.
Even better, even better.
Thank
Hello,
you.
how are you?
Good evening, how are you, Mayor and City Council? For the record, Jacqueline Genson. As the green sheet describes, just the process before us, the LDC for impact fees is generally silent, if you will, on how we treat clubhouse facilities. We've also tried to do a lot of research with the county on how they assess facilities like this. And essentially what it comes down to, while Bonita National and the clubhouse and the golf course essentially is for the private community, they do allow for outside play and other types of memberships that are sold until the community builds out. So understanding this, they did proceed with the independent fee calculation study. They went ahead and paid in good faith a certain portion of the fees that we would anticipate would be required if it was open to the public. And based on that independent fee study, a refund is due.
Council?
So moved. I mean, they entered it in good faith, so I think we should honor it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I just have to make a comment, though, because when I did read this, it was, the real difference in what was estimated was 344,000 versus 72 that they came up. So that difference is more in some ways, more troublesome than the fact that we have to give back $100,000. So my question is, what really happened there?
Are we that far off?
How can we
Sure.
be so far off? And do we have a problem with our calculation?
It's just,
Or-
so what happens in the code, you have a table for a list of uses. And so there's a retail rate, there's a restaurant rate, and those are the fees that we went ahead and assessed based on the breakdown of that building. There's a restaurant component, there's a retail component. So when you look at those fees, I mean, restaurant fees at the time, and this was based on the schedule prior to our amendments last year, which a lot of the fees were a lot higher. For restaurants, I forget the rate, but it is included in one of the attachments with their backup data. I mean, you were looking at a very high, retail is about, I think, $12,000 at one point, $12,000 per 1,000 square feet. Restaurants, I think we're in the 20s or 30s.
So you don't feel we have a systematic problem here? I mean, this doesn't
No, and
uncover
how the
something.
code reads is an applicant could go ahead and elect to be assessed in compliance with that schedule, or they can do the independent fee calculation. And just
understand that.
because of timing and where they needed to pull their permit, obtain this certificate of occupancy, they didn't have enough time to prepare that calculation ahead of time. We, as the city, wanted to make sure we were whole at some point, and we agreed to collect at least half of that fee up front. And they thought that the study would come back with lesser results, which it did.
But my question remains the same. I still have concern that whatever mechanisms we're using, it shouldn't be that different. I understand that we had an assumption that it was a public use versus internal use, but I would recommend that we take another look at that and make sure that there's not a real problem here.
Right, and the disconnect really is, Councilmember, in our fee schedule, we don't have a specific category for a clubhouse where there might be memberships open to the public, and a lot of the golf courses, especially in the off-season, do open up their courses to other memberships, and our impact fee code doesn't necessarily address that either. I know Collier County has 2 different ways to assess their impact fees for golf course communities. So, I mean, that could be an option too, but then that might necessitate an impact fee study and changes to the
When people are
code.
high, they don't protest it. If the usage is greater, we don't get to protest.
What are they actually saying they're doing?
It's included in the study. So what they did is they did a survey analysis of other communities that had similar characteristics. So there was 3 golf course communities that they analyzed. I think one was in Lee County and another one in Collier. And forgive me, I'm not the one that actually reviewed the data and analysis. But they actually did surveyed results. There was a whole methodology. So doing in-person surveys of employees, people that came to the golf course, just to go ahead and document the trip generation, which is tied to the fee and things like that.
This is not uncommon, right, John? Or, yeah.
No,
Or,
and typically,
Jackie,
this is
it's
a
not
technical
uncommon.
review document. Normally, these types of requests don't come to the council. It's done by your technical staff.
Right.
But just because the refund was in such a high amount, we wanted to
Right.
bring it to your attention for direction.
Okay.
Great. We're okay?
Yep.
Okay.
We got to vote?
Do you need a vote on this?
You made a motion.
Been a motion to accept? I'll make a motion. So moved. In a second? Okay, motion and a second. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilman Gibson.
Aye.
Councilman Forbes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Caramba.
Aye.
Councilman DeWitt.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr.
Aye.
Mayor Simmons.
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn.
Aye.
Okay, we're gonna move on to mayor and council member items. Amy?
I just have one thing. The Southwest Florida Economic Development Alliance has invited members of the Horizon Council. We're a member of that. And it's for March 27th, and I can't go to that. And I have the information. If anybody wants to go, I can have Arlene.
Send it around?
Send it around.
Sure.
Because I'm the representative on the Horizon Council. But if you're interested, you can do that.
Is that it? All done? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Greg,
sorry.
that's okay.
I thought you were talking to the next
I'm
person.
sorry. Greg?
2 things. Just wanted to congratulate the mayor on his team's win in the Super Bowl.
Oh.
Again?
You know what they call an ugly Super Bowl win? A Super Bowl win.
Again?
So boring.
So
Very boring.
Boring.
Yes.
Yeah,
Horrible.
again.
But if you're a defensive person, It was the best
But
game
how
you
ca-
ever saw.
How could you watch defense is what
Yeah,
I
right,
wanna
no, I know.
That and the other thing, I just want to remind city council and city staff and everybody in Bonita that we're doing the grand reopening of Station 23 tomorrow from 3 to 5.
I'll be there, it's on my calendar.
So please come by and check it out.
Okay. Laura,
I'm good.
you're good? Peter?
Good.
Mike?
I'm good, but I can't attend tomorrow. I'll be
And I
working.
can't either, Greg, nothing personal.
Peter? Yeah, Peter.
Fred.
I'm looking at, I'm looking. Get my eyes checked. Fred, how about you? You're good? All right, I'm gonna take just a minute, and I know everybody's anxious to go home, myself included. I was approached by a citizen probably a week ago, and I just want to, and this is completely to bounce this off of you guys, because I'd like to do it as a team or not do it as a team, whatever the case may be. I say a team, but let me get into the explanation. And I obviously respect this person, had a nice lunch, get talking about it, and they're like, you know, Lee Memorial is suing NCH. And they're back and forth, and they're fighting. So eventually they'll get that solved. But in the process, are the citizens of Bonita Springs being ignored and being held hostage, so to speak, because of this lawsuit? So the thought was from this gentleman is perhaps we could have a town hall meeting, I'm not saying here, but somewhere in town, probably not endorsed or whatever the case is by the city. Have a town hall meeting, have representatives from both Lee and NCH there, and say, okay, look, we know you guys have your differences, but while you guys are having your differences and dragging it out in court year after year after year after year after year, Bonita Springs isn't gonna get a hospital, right? While things are tied up. Nothing's gonna happen. We have an emergency room, that's great. Greg, in terms of response times, I don't need to have that discussion with you. So I'm just bringing it forward, maybe chew on it, think about it a little bit, but I am in favor of having a town hall and having Lee Health there and NCH there, and just saying, you know, hey, I don't know what's going on here, but while you guys are and gals are, you know, having a lawsuit, we're held up and we can't have a hospital. Why? So, and I'm sure, and it'll be framed a lot better than that. I apologize, but them just kind of laying it out there for discussion.
Can I make a suggestion on that, or thought, which is obviously NCH is going through a line change in their management. They've dropped a lawsuit against Immokalee. They've done that other thing with the community health center. I think NCH was suing with respect to, at one point, the hospital. I'm not sure I'm not sure Lee Health is suing NCH. But I kind of feel like we've got what is almost functionally a hospital up on Coconut. We have an emergency room that NCH has put in. We've got this other thing coming up, which is a third one, right, in Estero. And they're kind of in the middle of a lot of change at NCH. So I'm not saying I'm against the idea, but I wouldn't be for it now. I would wait until they kind of sort that out and let them make up their own mind.
And one
about where
thought
they're going.
was, and this isn't for the snowbirds listening, and please,
Right.
we love our snowbirds, but the thought was to possibly after session. So after session is what, May? I don't know. So maybe it's a ways off, but just something to consider.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now we have minutes to
So
approve.
moved. Second.
Approval of the minutes.
There, one correction.
Ooh, typos.
There
Ooh,
was.
Laura. Ooh, all right.
It's a first for the whole, ever.
Congressman DeWitt did the Pledge of Allegiance, not the invitation.
Wow. That's impressive.
There you go. Very nice, Laura. Fred, you didn't catch that one. What happened? All right, so approval of the minutes with that amendment. Been a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilman Forbes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Corumba. Aye. Councilman DeWitt.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr.
Aye.
Mayor Simmons.
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn.
No.
Councilman Gibson.
There you go.
Aye.
Very good. He
I
did
would
the
have
opening
to-
prayer in your mind. That's the way it's going to be,
Well,
not
you
the
know-
Pledge of Allegiance. All right, public comment. Members of the public that would like to speak, please come forward at this time.
We have no public.
No? Okay.
Kathy.
Then a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned. Thanks.